Chapter 146. After entering the courtyard, Ning Ke deliberately chose the darkest and most unobtrusive corner. However, he did not expect that no matter how low-key he was, the sound of Sang Sang drinking behind him still exposed his position like a firefly in the middle of the night. Facing dozens of complicated and shocked gazes, he was extremely uncomfortable. Especially when he saw the fiery gaze of the princess in the distance, he felt that something was wrong. He thought to himself, "Liu, you idiot, please don't drag me into this mess." Facing a fierce existence like Prince Longqing, no matter how talented I am, I can only be a fool. Ideals were always full, but reality was always harsh. There was always a gap between the two. The more you were afraid of something, the more it would come to you. The next moment, Ning Ke heard Princess Liu's deliberately cold question. "Ning Ke, have you finished the 4 jars of wine beside you?" Ning Ke glanced at the 4 small jars beside the table, scratched his head and replied, "I think so." Liu smiled and said, "Although they are small jars, 4 jars of wine is more than a dozen bowls of wine. How can you drink such strong wine? You are really a good-for-nothing." Ning Ke glanced at her from afar and thought, "Although I know that you like me very much even though you are scolding me on the surface, don't blame me for turning against you and taking Sang Sang away if you continue to say such words in front of so many people." Even though he thought so, he still answered honestly, "Sang Sang drank all of it. Sang Sang is only 13 years old. It is really beyond my expectation that she can drink so much strong wine." Liu gently turned the small wine cup between her fingers and said with a faint smile. She did not look at Prince Longqing, nor did she say a word to him, but everyone present knew the hidden meaning in her words. Only those who are good at fighting can fight. Only those who are good at drinking can drink. That little girl drank more than a dozen bowls of strong wine without collapsing. Is that considered a good drinker? Prince, are you going to lower yourself to drink a cup of wine with her? Priest Moli looked at Xiang Luo. With his strong eyesight, he could naturally see Sang Sang hiding behind Ning Ke wearing a handmaiden uniform. He asked unhappily, "Is that little girl also a student of the academy?" This matter could not be faked. The relationship between the academy students and Ning Ke was indifferent, even vaguely hostile. Someone answered, "That is Ning Ke's little handmaiden." Priest Moli flew into a rage and said, "Today's banquet is to send off the crown prince of Yen. Is so important. It is not easy for the academy students to attend. How can you let a little handmaiden mingle with you?" This anger was not pretentious, but was his real emotion. The West Hill Divine Kingdom had always been strict and valued. The West Hill Divine officials had always paid attention to the hierarchy and order. It was indeed a great insult for them to drink with a lowly little handmaiden. However, this was Chang'an, not the West Hill Divine Palace. Liu glanced at the deputy headmaster of the Revelation Institute and said, "That little girl is familiar with me. She is a young friend. The royal family of the Tang Empire is so generous that they can ignore the rules of etiquette. But your highness, there are 2 members of the royal family of the Yen Kingdom and I, the West Hill Divine Priest. Don't you need to consider our feelings?" Priest Moli said angrily, "Is this the way the Tang Empire treats its guests?" Liu's face darkened when she saw the aggressiveness of the other party. She said, "Today's banquet is for me to bid farewell to my old friends. Who would have thought that someone would come uninvited? Is this the way the West Hill treats its guests? There are good and bad guests. If anyone thinks that the Tang Empire does not treat its guests well, you might as well reflect on which type you belong to. If you still don't know, then see where the door is." This was the source of the Tang Empire's strength. Previously, when they were at a disadvantage in the battle of reason, Liu and the others could tolerate it and wait quietly. But when it came to the momentum after being reasonable or being unreasonable after being forced, who in the world could be a match for the Tang Empire? Priest Moli's face turned red with anger at Liu's words. However, facing the Tang princess who was about to lose her temper, what could he do or dare to do? It was not a battle of words, but more like a one-sided argument. Some people noticed a change in the table and gradually stopped talking. Because they saw that Prince Longqing did not seem to hear the anger of Priest Moli, nor did he feel the strength of the Tang princess. He just quietly looked at the table in the dark corner, suddenly smiled, raised the wine bowl in his hand, and drank it up. The banquet suddenly became quiet and everyone looked at the corner again. After a while, Sang Sang poked half of her face out from behind Ning Ke and asked in confusion, "Young master, what do you mean?" Ning Ke looked down at his small wine cup and the rice wine bowl for Sang Sang. He quietly tapped the table with his fingers and after a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "Is the wine good?" Sang Sang nodded and said, "Yes." "Do you want more?" "Yes." Ning Ke looked up and turned to look at her with a smile. He said, "Then continue." Sang Sang was a little embarrassed and said, "How can I steal the wine when there are so many people watching?" "You don't have to steal the wine." Ning Ke looked up and smiled. The dimple on his left cheek seemed to be able to hold countless wine. He pulled Sang Sang out from behind and said, "Sit beside me and drink openly. Drink as much as you want until you don't want to drink anymore." After being pulled out, Sang Sang hurriedly sat beside him and smoothed the front of her clothes. She lowered her head and did not want to meet those inexplicable gazes. She murmured in a very low voice, "How can I do that?" Ning Ke looked at Li Yu who was at the top of the courtyard and spread out his hands to show his helplessness. Li Yu smiled slightly and looked at the academy students present. She asked, "I wonder who is going to enter the course of magic skills on the second floor of the academy this time. I wonder how your preparations are going." Her Highness had asked a question, so they naturally had to respond. Moreover, the students present had vaguely guessed the princess's good intentions. Therefore, no matter how shocked and curious they were, they could only look away from the corner. Sang Sang did not know what this meant. She only knew that no one was looking at her like that anymore. She became much more relaxed, and once she relaxed, the enchanting aroma of the wine from the wine jar became even more alluring. Looking at the full wine bowl in front of her and making sure that no one was paying attention, she hurriedly brought it to her lips with her two small hands and drank it in one gulp. Then, she wiped the wine stains on her lips with her sleeves and put her hands on her knees to show that she had done nothing. Prince Longqing, who was seated in the distance, did not seem to see this scene. His gaze fell on the floor not far in front of him, but for some reason, he laughed and drank the wine in one gulp. This was a strange banquet. It was a banquet to see off the Crown Prince of Yen, but the Crown Prince of Yen, who had been smiling gently and saying nothing, was forgotten. Her Highness and the Academy students seemed to be enthusiastically discussing the life of the Academy and the events of the day after tomorrow, but in fact, no one cared about the content of the conversation. Everyone's thoughts or glances fell on two places. The handsome Prince Longqing, who was as graceful as the Son of God, kept drinking the wine in his bowl in silence and thoughtfully. The tanned little handmaiden, who was as quiet as a little rabbit, kept drinking the wine in her bowl with her head down. It seemed that they were drinking to drown their sorrows, but the more Prince Longqing drank, the more solemn his expression became, and the more Sang Sang's eyes became brighter. The words and fragments of gazes floating in the air seemed to be intoxicated by the wine, quietly falling on these two places. No one seemed to notice, but in fact, everyone was paying attention. Because of the secret order, the boss of the Victory House personally moved more than 30 jars of double-distilled spirits from the Gushan Commandery to the backyard, and then placed them at the top and the corner respectively. Sang Sang had been soaked in the corpses and rainwater for too long when she was a baby, so her body was congenitally cold. Sometimes when the disease broke out, she could only rely on the strong wine to stimulate the heat in her body to survive, so Ning Ke habitually carried a wine bag with him. Since childhood, she had been relying on strong wine to sustain her life. She gradually fell in love with drinking, and gradually found that it was difficult for her to get drunk. It was just that the master and the handmaiden were too poor when they were young. Even the cheapest burnt grain wine in Min Mountain, or the worst horse milk wine in the grassland, could not be infinitely drunk. Especially she liked strong wine, and the stronger the wine, the more expensive it was. Even in Chang'an City, after the two suddenly became rich, they had never drunk as much as they did today. The wine was the Gushan Commandery Jiujiang double-distilled wine, the strongest wine in the world. Moreover, they could drink it all the time without spending money. For a poor girl like Sang Sang, this was undoubtedly the happiest enjoyment in the world. The wine jars beside the table were emptied one by one. She had completely forgotten that the purpose of her young master bringing her here today was to see that annoying prince. She had also forgotten what kind of occasion she was in, and how many people had stared at her before. She just felt happier and happier, and her willowy eyes became brighter and brighter. Prince Longqing was not slower than her in drinking. After a slight dignified look on his unparalleled handsome face, it gradually turned into some kind of interest and puzzlement, as well as a kind of hidden excitement and fervor that he had finally met his match. More than 30 jars of double-distilled spirits were finally drunk. Everyone in the field looked at those empty wine jars and thought that the spirits that were enough to make several horses drunk were actually drunk by these two people. They could not help but feel that it was extremely inconceivable. Prince Longqing did not use his cultivation to detoxify the wine. More than 10 jars of spirits finally made his inviolable cheeks, which were as awe-inspiring as the Son of God, loosen a little. His eyes were somewhat blurred and confused. But Sang Sang, who was sitting in the corner, only blushed a little, her abdomen slightly bulged, and her eyes became countless times brighter than usual. Other than that, she was as calm as usual, without a trace of drunkenness. Ning Ke glanced at Prince Longqing in the distance and glanced at Sang Sang beside him. He laughed and picked up his chopsticks to heavily knock on the wine jar. With a clear and crisp sound, it was the sound of victory. For a moment, the whole room was silent. The drunkenness in Prince Longqing's eyes gradually dissipated. He looked at the corner and expressionlessly asked, "Young man, are you Ning Ke?" Ning Ke stood up and answered, "Yes." "Is that your little handmaiden?" "Yes." "Reward." Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at each other and saw no hesitation in each other's eyes. He smiled and respectfully replied, "Thank you for the reward, Your Highness." Prince Longqing calmly said a few words to the Taoist child behind him. The Taoist child from West Hill came forward and looked at Ning Ke standing in the corner with a gentle expression on his face. He said loudly in a tone as if he was bestowing a gift, "The prince is studying in Chang'an and is about to recruit people in his mansion. Today, Haotian gives you the honor and gives you the opportunity to offer your little handmaiden to serve his highness. Hurry up and thank him." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 147. At that time, servants and maids were like private property and could be disposed of at will. The situation in the Tang Empire was slightly better. The law of the Tang Empire strictly forbade the intentional injury of slaves, but it did not forbid the sale of slaves. It was not uncommon in Chang'an to give beautiful concubines and smart maids to them. And the gifts between the distinguished men were often legendary and beautiful. When the West Hill Taoist child said Prince Longqing's words, no one present felt strange. Although the students of the academy, Huashanyue and other Tangs were somewhat disgusted by the Taoist child's arrogant and generous words, it was, after all, in line with the class difference between the two parties, so they remained silent. In the eyes of the crowd, little Sang Sang, who was standing beside Ning Ke, was only 13 or 14 years old. She was as thin as a bean sprout, with an ordinary appearance and dark skin. Prince Longqing naturally did not want to take her back to his mansion to warm his bed because of her beauty, but because of the drinking competition. The bigwig of West Hill, who was high above, had taken a fancy to an inconspicuous little handmaiden in Chang'an because of the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, banquets, archery and so on. In the upper class, this was considered elegant. If Ning Ke was willing to give the little handmaiden to Prince Longqing, the prince would naturally give him a generous gift in return. It might be another anecdote in the future. Therefore, no one felt shocked, strange or angry. Instead, some people, such as Zhong Dajuan, cast a faint look of envy at Ning Quebec. They secretly thought that if Ning Ke could gain Prince Longqing's favor by gifting the little handmaiden, he would be able to gain a lot of benefits and convenience in the future. Princess Li Yu also remained silent at this time, but her silence had nothing to do with her demeanor. She was thinking about something that happened last year and looked at Ning Ke with a faint smile, knowing that this matter might develop in an interesting direction. In fact, after hearing the West Hill Taoist child's gentle and extremely generous announcement, Ning Ke was stunned for a long time before he figured out what the other party wanted to do. The reason why his reaction was so slow was that he had never thought that anyone would ask for sang-sang from him in such an arrogant manner. Why? Sorry, there's no reason or reason. It's just because he's the high and mighty Prince Longqing, a bigwig in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. He likes your little handmaiden and wants to have a little handmaiden to drink with him when he's bored. So you should send your handmaiden, who you've raised painstakingly and slept by the Kong bed for more than 10 years to him, and then smile and wait for the prince to reward you with money, a bright future, and some glory when he's happy. Because the scientific reasoning was actually unreasonable. Ning Ke's mood suddenly became extremely bad, but the smile on his face became brighter. He looked at the table in the distance and sighed, Prince Longqing, you are really beautiful. His reaction was very slow. Sang-sang, who was slow to react to many things, especially after drinking too much liquor today, reacted even slower than him. It was not until now that she realized that the prince at the banquet wanted to take her away from her young master. She couldn't help but frown and refute, young master, he looks ugly. Sang-sang had not thought, and as she had thought, as long as her. As, if master, as long, she would become. They only cared about Ning Ke's answer and had been quietly waiting for his answer. Most of them guessed that Ning Ke would agree, and a few of them thought that he would refuse. But no one expected that Ning Ke's answer had nothing to do with this matter. It seemed somewhat inexplicable, Prince Longqing, you are really beautiful. What does that mean? Note, Prince Longqing had just sobered up and was quietly looking at the empty wine jar on the table. Suddenly hearing this, he slightly frowned and raised his handsome face to look into the distance. He said indifferently, thank you, I know. Since you know you are beautiful, Ning Ke looked at that place and said very seriously, then don't be too optimistic. As soon as these words came out, the whole table was in an uproar. Even if the people present had thought that Ning Ke would refuse to send his little handmaiden, they also thought that he would use a very graceful way to refuse, such as saying that he was used to using this little handmaiden, that this little handmaiden came from a rough background, and so on and so forth. But they did not expect that he would refuse so simply, directly, crudely and fiercely. You want my little handmaiden? You are too optimistic. Prince Longqing's face gradually darkened, but then he smiled a little. Ning Ke looked at him with a smile and explained, the reason is very simple. Because I am not willing. Prince Longqing slowly stretched out his hands from his sleeves and calmly placed them on the table. He calmly looked at Ning Ke in the dark corner in the distance and slowly said, because you are not willing, you may have missed a lot. I never worry about missing anything. Ning Ke replied. Prince Longqing's sharp eyes fell on his face from a very far distance. After a moment of silence, he said, it may even be, my friendship. Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and replied, maybe your friendship is not as valuable as you think. Hearing this, Prince Longqing's picturesque eyebrows seemed to be plated with a layer of frost. He said in a low voice, it seems that you value your little handmaiden very much. Ning Ke replied with a smile, what does it have to do with you? Prince Long Qing coldly said, the master of the little handmaiden is really interesting. I am more and more interested in you. Ning Ke shook his head and said, mix your interest with wine and drink it, if you can still drink. When the two were talking, it was quiet in the courtyard of the Victory House. Even the birds outside the Yenyu corridor were nervous and did not dare to make a sound. As the conversation went on, people's faces became more and more wonderful and strange. They never thought that Ning Ke, an ordinary academy student, could actually talk with the bigwig of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. Not only did he not lose the upper hand, but his words were extremely sarcastic and tough. Prince Long Qing's expression was still calm, but everyone could see the burning emotion in his indifferent eyes and the tough meaning revealed in his words. Only he coldly asked, but I am still very curious, in your mind, who is qualified to be the master of this little handmaiden? Under this strong power, Ning Ke seemed to feel nothing. He slightly raised his eyebrows and replied, in fact, this still has nothing to do with you. But since your highness is so interested, I can only say, at least you are not qualified. If I am not qualified, then who is qualified? Prince Long Qing laughed loudly, but there was no joy in his laughter, only some kind of strong confidence and domineering. The laughter gradually stopped. He glanced at the silent Li Yu and asked, is it Her Highness? Ning Ke smiled, and the dimple on his left cheek was particularly small and fresh. He said, no, she is not. As soon as this sentence came out, there was another uproar. However, before these shocked and complicated emotions could ferment, Li Yu smiled and gave an answer. She looked at Prince Long Qing and the others and said, I have asked this guy for Sang Sang several times, but he did not care about me. So obviously I am not qualified. As for you, Prince Long Qing, I think you are not more qualified than me. In the field, Prince Long Qing and the people of West Hill and Yen had been in the upper hand for a long time. Li Yu had been silent and watching the chess game without saying a word. She was the most favored princess of the Tang Empire. Even if you were a peerless genius, a bigwig in the judicial department of West Hill, and a prince of Yen Kingdom, you were not qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as me. I did not care about Ning Ke's repeated rejection, so what right did you have to care? This was a very simple and powerful logic, which was the typical principle and style of the Tang people. The princess of the Tang Empire made a strong endorsement, and this little storm seemed to come to an end. Sang Sang pulled Ning Ke's sleeve and looked up, saying, young master, let's go home. Ning Ke smiled and nodded. However, everyone present, including Li Yu, did not expect that he did not leave. Instead, he reached out and rubbed Sang Sang's head. He looked at Prince Long Qing and said very seriously, Prince, I have a few questions to ask you. Hearing this sentence, many people present thought of what Xie Qingyun had said when he stood up, and suddenly there was a silence. The academy looked at Ning Ke in shock, thinking that the third young master Xie had been defeated in the debate. Did this guy, who avoided the exam by claiming to be sick, want to make a big splash? Prince Long Qing's expression gradually became serious. He reached out to tidy up the front lapel of his clothes, sat up straight, and spread out his right hand, saying, please. Don't get me wrong. I have no interest in debating. In fact, I am not good at it. I am just a little confused about your previous confidence, so I have a few questions to ask you. Ning Ke took a step forward and asked, Prince, may I ask if the firmament has eyes? The clear blue sky was gray and cloudy, and snow was falling. How could there be eyes above the winter sky? Even the stars above the night sky could not be regarded as eyes, right? However, although Ning Ke said it was not debating, Prince Long Qing still responded very cautiously. After a little thought, he understood what Ning Ke meant. Haotian lived above the firmament, and looked down on millions of people with compassion and benevolence. Then, the firmament naturally has eyes. Ning Ke then asked, is there primordial qi between heaven and earth? Prince Long Qin replied, "Of course there is." Ning Ke quickly asked the next question, "Is there any regularity in the fluctuation of primordial qi?" Prince Long Qin replied, "Yes." "Does the locust tree have roots?" "Yes." "Does the milkworm have life?" "Yes." "Does a normal person have thoughts?" "Yes." "Does the Tang Empire have an emperor?" "Yes." "Does the West Hill have doctrines?" "Yes." Ning Ke asked the questions faster and faster, but these questions were indeed very simple and had nothing to do with the debate. Prince Long Qin answered faster and faster as well. Their questions and answers were as quick as frying beans. The crowd became more and more confused about what he wanted to do. At this moment, they heard Ning Ke's next question. "Are there holes in the socks?" Of course, Prince Long Qin suddenly raised his eyebrows and stopped talking. Then he looked at Ning Ke standing in the field with a faint smile, as if he was looking at a pitiful worm whose cleverness had been crushed. He continued to answer in an indifferent tone, "No." This series of questions was dull and even boring. But because it was related to Prince Long Qin in the previous storm, everyone listened very carefully. When Ning Ke asked the questions, all the students thought along with him and silently answered with Prince Long Qin in their hearts. When the last question appeared, they even directly answered "yes" in their hearts. Until now, when they heard Prince Long Qin's sudden change of topic and answered "no," they thought for a while and were shocked to realize that all this was just a verbal trap set by Ning. Quebec Citoyen frowned and thought for a while. She looked at Ning Ke and shook her head. She lowered her voice and said to Jean Wuxia beside her, "It's a pity that we didn't make Prince Long Qin look bad." Prince Long Qin was indeed a bigwig in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace and a genius who was the center of attention. However, at the most critical moment, he found that Ning Ke's series of questions were just to lure him into a certain psychological pattern and verbal inertia. Ning Ke wanted him to make a mistake on the last question, which was so simple that it was stupid, and wanted him to admit in front of everyone that the socks had holes. Naturally, he would not be fooled. He looked at Ning Ke with a pitiful and disgusted look and said, "I didn't expect that I would patiently listen to your question, but in the end, it was just this kind of petty cleverness. I really didn't expect you to do that." Ning Ke also looked at him with a faint smile. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, "It's indeed a petty cleverness. But it's a pity that you can't even deal with it. I'm really disappointed." No one understood what he was talking about. They thought he was talking nonsense out of shame and anger. Those academy classmates who had always been estranged from him turned their heads and showed that they were ashamed to admit that they were classmates. Ning Ke shook his head and looked down at Sang Sang. He sighed and said, "Do you remember the story I told you when you were young? How did most of the bears die in the end? They died of stupidity." Sang Sang said, "Young master, you were right the other day. Most men who are too good-looking are not smart." Then she looked at Prince Long Qin and explained seriously, "If there are no holes in the socks, then how do you put them in?" Once again, everyone was silent. Those who understood the matter were dumbfounded and shamefully lowered their heads. They did not understand the matter, but looking at the expressions of the people around them, those who could guess were dumbfounded and had no time to lower their heads. Li Yu and Citoyen couldn't help but smile. The expressions of the people from West Hill were extremely ugly. As for Prince Long Qin himself, after being called a man who was not smart by Sang Sang and figured out the abominable language trap, his face was so gloomy that it looked like a beautiful watercolor painting on a rainy day. "I asked you just now, and you also answered me. We all know that Haotian has eyes. He is looking at the mortals in the secular world. You and I are like insects under the locust tree, living in the primordial qi of heaven and earth. We have to follow certain rules." Ning Ke looked at Prince Long Qin and said calmly, "These rules in the Tang Empire are the golden words of the Emperor or the laws of the Tang Empire. In West Hill, they are the laws of the Holy Church. However, no matter which one is, it clearly recognizes that everyone's private property is not to be violated. Therefore, my things are always mine. As long as I don't agree, then don't think about taking them away. Only then did everyone realize that there was such a hidden meaning in those seemingly boring questions. Ning Ke continued, I asked these questions just to let the prince know these principles. Even if you answered the answer that a 3-year-old should know, it would be meaningless. Of course, the socks have holes, and of course, my handmaiden is mine. As long as I don't agree, you can't take away a penny from me. Prince Longqing stared at his face, and after a long silence, he suddenly laughed and said calmly, what you said makes sense, but I also know some other principles. If you don't have power, even if you only have the last penny on you, sometimes it will be difficult to protect it. Ning Ke smiled and asked, Prince, are you threatening me? Then he looked at Xingjing and Li Yu at the table. He bowed with his hands folded in front and asked seriously, Your Highness, Grand Secretary, he is threatening me. What should I do? Grand Secretary Xingjing was pushed to the wall by his words. He stroked his beard and said with a forced smile, How could there be such a thing? You must have misheard. Li Yu replied with a smile, Do you want to fight to your death with your insignificant ability? Suddenly, she changed the topic and said calmly, But I really don't know who dares to threaten the people of Tang Empire in Chang'an. This sentence was the real threat. Priest Moli flew into a rage. He slammed the table in front of him and was about to stand up. However, at this moment, Prince Longqing coldly looked at his former teacher and forcibly suppressed him. Then he looked at Ning Ke and asked with a smile, You are also a student of the academy. Will I see you when I enter the second floor? Someone suddenly answered, He didn't even enter the course of magic skills, so naturally he can't enter the second floor. The person who interrupted was Zhong Dajuan. Ning Ke's previous question about the socks had directly embarrassed everyone present, and he felt the most strongly. At this time, when he heard Prince Longqing's question, he immediately pointed out that Ning Ke had no cultivation potential and was not qualified to enter the second floor, as if he could humiliate Ning Ke in this way. Prince Longqing looked at Ning Ke expressionlessly and said, That's a pity. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke smiled and said, Perhaps there aren't so many regrets in the world. Sang Sang pulled his sleeve and said for the second time, Young master, let's go home. Ning Ke glanced at Zhong Dajuan and the other students of the academy and said, I know you have always been ashamed to be associated with me. Today you will only think that I played some tricks, but I don't care. I just want to remind you to put these moral thoughts into your studies. If you still can't answer these questions that even a 3-year-old can answer in the future, then it will be my turn to be ashamed to be associated with you. After saying this, he bowed to Li Yu and several officials of the imperial court, and then turned to leave with Sang Sang. As he walked out of the courtyard, Ning Ke sighed with emotion and said, Peerless, genius, hope for resurgence, then he shook his head and sighed with a smile. Pia Pia. Listening to the constantly floating voices, there was an awkward silence. Prince Longqing's face was extremely ugly. Note, I like this line very much. In my hometown dialect, people often say this to satirize others for overestimating themselves. Do you think you are prettier than others? P.S. I wrote this chapter very painstakingly, and every paragraph was dug out. I hope the effect is good. In addition, I miss home. My favorite shaman is not beautiful now. Finally, I need a recommendation vote. In the next few days, I will probably only be able to read 3K, and then I will be too embarrassed to ask for votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 148. Pia Pia was the crisp sound of the soles of shoes hitting the cheeks. It was a pity that the people in Chang'an City had not seen the comedians in skirts in that world, so they probably could not accurately understand the meaning they wanted to convey. Ning Ke walked out of the courtyard with Sang Sang, chatted with Chu Yuxian for a while, and then went out of the side door. However, they had not gone far in the horse carriage when they heard the rapid and dense sounds of hooves coming from behind. Sang Sang's thin shoulders slightly tightened. She looked up at him, her willowy eyes full of suspicion and vigilance. Ning Ke smiled and patted her shoulder, comforting her. Even if the prince is so angry that he dares to send his subordinates to kill or beat us in Chang'an, he would not be so idiotic as to follow us as soon as we left the house. His judgment was not wrong. The luxurious carriages with soft ropes on them were branded with the emblem of the imperial family. The coachman saw this and hurriedly shouted for the carriages to move to the side of the road. However, he did not expect that these carriages with the emblem of the great Tang imperial family would slowly stop. The green curtain was lifted, revealing Li Yu's beautiful and pleasant face. Her brows were slightly furrowed, but there was a smile at the corner of her mouth. Her true emotions could not be seen. Ning Ke hurriedly got off the horse carriage with Sang Sang and respectfully walked to the window to bow. He might not have any respect for the princess deep in his heart, but he did not dare to show it on this crowded street. I heard that you are not popular in the academy a few days ago. Li Yu smiled and looked at him by the window. After a pause, she said, at the banquet today, even though you were standing up for the academy, you did not make your classmates feel like they were on the same side. From this, it can be seen that your relationship with the academy is not bad, but extremely poor. Ning Ke replied with a smile, popularity is a strange thing. It's like the weeds growing on the city walls. Wherever the wind blows, the weeds will run. If you're not popular, it just means that the wind you blow isn't strong enough. What you said is interesting. Li Yu said with a smile. Ning Ke scratched his head and looked at the woman behind the window. He replied, I only said it because your highness could understand. Li Yu sighed, if other people heard you talking to me in such a tone, they would be shocked at your impudence. Ning Ke smiled and bowed with hands folded in front. That's because her highness is virtuous and we are old acquaintances. Naturally, I don't need to be too particular with my words. Li Yu sighed, stared into his eyes and said, you are a young man. You are not impudent when you should be. You are only impudent in front of me. Ning Ke felt strange hearing this. In the past 6 months, Sang Sang often went to the princess's mansion to play and was very familiar with Li Yu. She did not resist such intimate actions. She burped and said softly, young master is the real capable one. Hua Shangyue, the senior captain of Gushan Commandery, came to the side of the royal carriage. Looking at the carriage that was about to disappear at the corner, he suddenly said, I haven't seen you for a year. I didn't expect that young man from border town to enter the academy. On the journey last year, Mr. Liu Qingchen once said something to me. He said that since we can be sure that Ning Ke can enter the academy without any reason, why can't we believe that he can enter the second floor? Li Yu looked through the window and looked at the lively crowd on the street in front of her. She said indifferently, today when I saw him talking in the courtyard, I suddenly thought of this sentence. I thought of Mr. Liu's strange hope for him and could not help but have a thought. Could it be that I have misjudged him this time? Today, his performance at the banquet was indeed wonderful. He did not embarrass the Tang Empire and the Academy. But, this is after all just some skills in words. If he were to face a peerless cultivation genius like Prince Long Qin on the battlefield, as he said before, it would be overestimating him. Hua Shangyue commented indifferently. In his opinion, comparing an ordinary student of the academy like Ning Ke with Prince Long Qin should not be considered in this way, for it was too absurd. Maybe what you said is right. Li Yu put down the cyan curtain and leaned back on the golden cushion. She raised her elbow to support her chin. There was a playful smile between her clear and sharp eyes. If you are really a talent, then you will eventually become my talent in the future. She smiled and murmured, because at least I already know what your weakness is. When the carriage gathered and chatted in the middle of the street, a large group of people walked out of the main entrance of the Victory House. They wore Taoist robes and looked solemn. They were the people from the West Hill Divine Palace. Prince Longqing walked in the middle of the crowd with a calm expression. As soon as he went out, his beautiful face attracted a lot of screams from the women on the street. Listening to these cries of joy and admiration, he was not moved by this, nor did he show a look of disgust. He was just solemn and quiet. He slowly stepped on the golden carriage engraved with Fu characters. He closed his eyes and kept silent for a moment. Suddenly he opened his eyes and said indifferently, "That academy student is not a cultivator." Priest Moli, the deputy dean of the Yutian Academy of West Hill, sat respectfully opposite him. Although they were teacher and student in the past, there was a gap between them when Prince Longqing became the second person in the judicial department of the Divine Hall after the Tao Addict. No one dared to cross it. Priest Moli frowned and said angrily, "I don't know if it was deliberately arranged by the Tangs." Prince Longqing thought of the little handmaiden hiding in the dark corner and shook his head expressionlessly. Outside the carriage, melodious music drifted in from who knows where. Prince Longqing suddenly smiled gently. His handsome face was as dazzling as a peach blossom. He murmured with emotion, "I can't believe I would lose my composure for a little handmaiden. It seems that my Taoist heart is also covered with dust after entering Chang'an." After confirming that Ning Ke and Sang Sang were not cultivators, he didn't want to care about this matter anymore. Because his pride lay in other higher levels. His purpose of coming to Chang'an was to enter the second floor of the academy. However, Prince Longqing's smile gradually faded and he said indifferently, "Find out who that student is. I hate him very much." Back to the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street, Sang Sang untied the big black umbrella wrapped in coarse cloth on her back and prepared to wash rice and cook rice. Today they drank a lot of hard liquor, but the delicate fruits and small dishes that the nobles liked could hardly fill their stomachs that had been honed by the sandstorms of the frontier fortress. Ning Ke sat on the chair by the window and stared blankly at the blue sky with his hands on the window lattice. Thinking of the encounter in Victory House today, he suddenly frowned and said, "I don't know why I hate that guy very much." He didn't say who it was, but Sang Sang knew it was him. She poured the water from the well into the big pot and wiped her hands on her apron. She looked back at the window and said, "I don't know why I hate His Highness so much now. I was going to touch his face and ask him what kind of powder he used." The next day, Ning Ke went to the academy as usual. Then he found that his classmates looked at him in a strange way. They probably knew what had happened yesterday, but for some reason, they still looked at him with faint contempt and quickly withdrew it. After the bell rang, Situelan caught him in the Yenyu corridor and said regretfully, "Yesterday you won the reputation for the academy. Everyone was grateful to you and even felt guilty. But why did you say those words to provoke them before you left? It's a pity that you missed the chance to repair the relationship." "I didn't mess it up, so why should I give them the chance to repair it?" Ning Ke answered with a smile and went to the old library. Late at night, Ning Ke looked at Chen Pippi who came out of the bookshelf panting. He handed him the expensive crab porridge with both hands and placed a futon for him. Then he bowed with both hands folded in front and bowed very seriously. Chen Pippi held the crab porridge and was stunned speechless. The smile on Ning Ke's face was extremely sincere, which was many times more genuine than the salted duck egg yolk in the academy's crab porridge. He looked at Chen Pippi and said sincerely, "Tomorrow only one person can enter the second floor. I really want to enter, but I really don't want Prince Longqing to enter. Tell me, how much hope do I have? Don't look at me like that. I know Prince Longqing is like the Son of God from heaven, and I'm just an ordinary lump of dirt in the human world. It seems hopeless to compete with him in terms of cultivation state and strength, and to beat him in the entrance test. But I think, if you secretly tell me the exam questions, maybe there will always be hope in the human world." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 149. After Ning Ke said this, the old library fell into silence. Chen Pipi stared at his eyes, and after a long silence, his thick lips slightly moved and he said, "You are really beautiful." Ning Ke was so angry that he stared back at him and said coldly, "Even if you don't want to reveal the exam questions, you don't have to talk to me like this. I don't believe that I can't enter the second floor without your help." Chen Pipi looked at him and shook his head pitifully. He said, "You have said many times that you want to enter the second floor. I didn't pay much attention at that time. I thought that although your aptitude was much worse than mine, it would not be difficult for you to defeat the so-called talent Xie Qingyun after half a year of careful guidance from me. However, who would have thought that the West Hill Divine Palace would be willing to let Long Qing come to Chang'an City? With this person in front of you, you really have no hope at all. I remember clearly that you said a few days ago that in your eyes, Prince Long Qing is just some cats and dogs. Now you say that I am not qualified to be compared with him. Does that mean that I am not even as good as a cat or dog in your eyes?" Ning Ke said angrily, waving his sleeves. Chen Pipi raised his fleshy arm and patted his shoulder. He sincerely comforted him, "You don't have to say it so clearly. I was worried that it would hurt your self-esteem, so I didn't say it directly." "Then why does it matter if you tell me the exam questions?" Ning Ke said angrily, "It's no good for you if I can't enter the second floor. If Prince Long Qing enters the second floor and finds out your real identity, you will also cause a lot of trouble. Because you are unlucky." Chen Pipi looked at him sympathetically and said, "The headmaster of the academy and eldest brother have not returned from their travels. Although the second floor is opened according to the dates set last year, it is second brother and the professors in the front yard who are in charge of it. The professors will not tell me the exam questions. Even if I know, I can't tell you at the risk of being whipped by second brother. Second senior brother is a righteous and serious man. He hates dirty tricks and shameless tricks the most in his life. If he knows that you want to use my back door, even if you enter the second floor, he will beat you and kick you out." He patted Ning Ke's shoulder again and comforted him, "You are really unlucky. If the headmaster of the academy and eldest brother are here, they are very easy to talk to. Maybe I can ask them to let you enter the second floor." "What a pity." Ning Ke sat cross-legged on the floor and thought that if what Chen Pipi said was true, then his luck was indeed terrible. He could not help but sigh bitterly, the headmaster is really too much. How can there be so many fun places in the world? It's really irresponsible of him not to return to the academy after playing for a year. Chen Pipi's face was full of disdain as he exposed his thoughts. You want the headmaster to rush back to the academy because you want him to be irresponsible. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke patted the floor heavily and looked up into Chen Pipi's eyes. He said seriously, "Well, I don't expect you to leak the questions, but you have to at least tell me how to enter the second floor. It is better to know the general scope and methods of the exam than to be confused now." "I can tell you." Chen Pipi picked up the crab porridge and happily swallowed half of it. He said vaguely, "But it is useless to say this." "Why?" Ning Ke asked nervously. "Because the exam method is different every time the second floor opens. The specific content is decided by the headmaster of the academy years in advance. You may be asked to write a piece of calligraphy, or draw a picture. You may also be asked to swim in the wetland. Or you may even be asked to eat faster." Take that year, Chen Pipi began to introduce with great interest, but Ning Ke's mind drifted elsewhere. When he heard that it might be calligraphy and painting, his mind buzzed and he felt extremely happy. However, when he heard what Chen Pipi said, the happiness or surprise suddenly turned into confusion and extreme absurdity. Wait, swim and eat. What's this test about? Chen Pippi put down the crab porridge in his hand, looked at him innocently and said, "I'm not the headmaster of the academy, how would I know what the test is about? But I heard it from my senior brothers and sisters, so it shouldn't be false." Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at his fat face. He hesitated and asked, "Then, what did you take that year?" Upon hearing this question, Chen Pippi gently waved his sleeves to wipe off the non-existent dust on his clothes. A calm and composed smile appeared on his face as he put on a calm and unperturbed demeanor. Then, he slowly said, "I've told you that I'm a rare cultivation genius. That year, I directly entered the second floor after I got 6 A+ grades. The headmaster of the academy greeted me with a smile on the mountain road and eldest brother rubbed my head affectionately. There was no need for me to be tested. This should be called exemption from the examination." Ning Ke looked at the complacent expression in his bean-like eyes and suddenly had a strong impulse to beat him up. But when he thought that this fat man was a cultivator in the knowing destiny state who was more vigorous than Prince Long Qing, he had to dispel this idea. He sneered and said, "In my opinion, you are a big pot of steamed buns." Chen Pippi touched his head and asked curiously, "Is it cute to be white and fat?" "No, it means that you are purely a foodie." Ning Ke angrily scolded, "You claim to be the treasure of the academy and the most favored younger brother of the second floor. But you don't know what the exam is and you don't know either. I even pinned all my hopes on you and bought you such an expensive bowl of porridge." He thought of Prince Long Qing's graceful figure when the second floor opened tomorrow, thought of his own miserable ending, and looked at Chen Pippi's helpless expression. He felt more and more annoyed and reached out to grab the porridge bowl beside him and poured the remaining half of the crab porridge into his stomach. "Oh, why did you drink all of it?" No one knew whether Chen Pippi was angry because the crab porridge was robbed or because he was called a foodie. He pointed at Ning Ke's nose and scolded, "I am a useless foodie. If it weren't for me, I am really useless." Ning Ke lowered his head. His expression could not be seen, but his voice was a little tired and gloomy. "In fact, I have always thought that I am a real genius and can learn everything quickly, including killing horses, cows, and chickens. But cultivation really hurts my confidence. After so many years, I finally made some progress last year. But now when I see Prince Long Qing, I can't have the confidence to fight him head-on, so I subconsciously come to you for help." He raised his head and looked at Chen Pippi, saying self-mockingly, "I really want to enter the second floor, but I really don't have the confidence to defeat Long Qing and become the only one." In the past 6 months, Chen Pippi had seen Ning Ke improve step by step from an ordinary lad who didn't know what cultivation was to the current state. He had long believed that this friend of the same age as him was also a genius. Interestingly, Ning Ke did not know this because he lacked a normal frame of reference. But Ning Ke's time in the cultivation world was too short. Not to mention compared with him, even Prince Long Qing was a mountain that he could not reach. Looking at Ning Ke's self-deprecating expression, he had a strong feeling of sympathy. After a sigh, he forced a smile and said, "Although it is difficult for a peerless genius like me to understand the troubles of ordinary people like you, but, just like in the past 6 months, if you have any questions about cultivation, you can still ask me. In this case, there is not much difference whether you enter the second floor of the academy or not." Ning Ke shook his head and replied, "Like now, I am learning from you. So no matter how well I learn, I will never be able to surpass you. But what if I have the opportunity to learn from the headmaster?" Hearing this, Chen Pippi's small eyes widened, and the little sympathy he had just had suddenly disappeared. He shouted angrily, "Are you still not satisfied with reaching my level?" Ning Ke tiredly leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. He was too lazy to say anything, and he looked extremely disappointed. Chen Pippi couldn't bear to look at him. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 150. For Ning Ke, the opening of the second floor was a big deal. No matter whether he could grasp the slim chance or not, at least the chance was right in front of him. For most people, being calm in the face of a big deal was an admirable quality. Ning Ke, who had been through countless life-and-death situations, could barely do this. Whenever he encountered a really big event, in addition to forcing himself to calm down, he also had to do the most important preparation work, which was to take Sang Sang with him. The spring sun had not risen yet, and Chang'an was still dark. He left the Vermilion Bird School in a horse carriage with Sang Sang. When they arrived at the academy at the foot of the mountain in the southern suburbs, the morning breeze was still cool. The meadow of the academy, which should have been quiet, was already very lively. The cavalrymen of the Yulin Royal Guards in full armor were vigilantly patrolling around. Under the temporary awning, the officials from the Ministry of Rites were nervously arranging seats. Under the trees in the distance, some men in Tang official uniforms stood expressionlessly. It was unknown which department these people belonged to, but they naturally exuded a dangerous aura. Looking at the lively and solemn scene around him, Ning Ke thought of the academy entrance examination a year ago. He found that the security level today was not much lower than that of the academy entrance examination. Only then did he realize one thing. The opening of the second floor was certainly not only a big deal in his life, but also a big deal for the whole of Chang'an. This year, because Prince Long Qing from the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall was going to enter the second floor of the academy, which involved the complicated relationship between the Tang Empire, the West Hill Divine Palace and the Yan Kingdom, it became a big deal. Because of the tight security and bad luck, Sang Sang could not enter the academy this time. She could only regretfully wait in the meadow outside the stone gate of the academy. At this time, there was still half a day before the opening of the second floor. Ning Ke deliberately came early not to sit in the academy's meadow and bask in the sun like a tourist. He walked into the familiar academy, walked through the bamboo forest along the back alley, walked around the wetland twice, and then went to the old library to greet the instructor who had just woken up. Then he lifted the front of his robe and walked upstairs. Professor Yu's childish figure did not appear beside the desk by the east window, not knowing whether it was because it was too early or for some other reason. Ning Ke was slightly startled. He walked to the table by the west window and poured water into the ink to moisten the brush. After a few deep breaths, he casually wrote a piece of calligraphy. After confirming that his mind was clear and calm, he put down the brush and left. Thoughts, persistence, ego, ambition, sword. The female professor's words seemed to be covered with a layer of veil, and the hidden meaning could not be seen clearly. However, Ning Ke vaguely understood something. The female professor had said this to him because she had seen through his nature. Since he escaped from Chang'an City at the age of 4, he had relied on this spirit to survive and live better and better. Thinking of Chen Pipi's solemn words in the old library last night, "Stay true to yourself, and do your best," Ning Ke found that it was actually the same as what the female professor had said. After careful consideration, although he still did not know what the test would be when the second floor opened, he could roughly guess what the test would be. This should be something that I am good at. Ning Ke gently clenched his fists and walked through the wetlands and quiet alleys, arriving at the already noisy front yard of the academy. Among the black and white buildings of the Qingmei Academy, so many people appeared out of nowhere. The professors and doctors who usually spent most of their time researching their own topics had collectively moved all kinds of chairs outside, holding hot tea in their hands and arguing fiercely about what would happen on the second floor today. They even began to make bets. The students of the academy had arrived early. Although most of them did not dare to hope that they could enter the second floor, no one was willing to miss such a moment. The students surrounded the 6 students of the course of magic skills and kept cheering for them. Naturally, Xie Qingyun from South Jin Kingdom was the focus of everyone's attention. It was almost noon. Accompanied by melodious ritual music, Princely Pei Yan of the Tang Empire, Princess Liu, and several officials of the imperial court walked up from the meadow. Following closely behind them were envoys from various countries and dozens of divine priests and Taoists from the West Hill Divine Palace. Some of the green trees along the path in the middle of the meadow had already blossomed. They were pink, fresh and lovely, especially the peach tree near the main entrance of the academy. For some reason, it was especially in full bloom, tenderly swaying in the spring breeze. A young man in a dark robe walked from the path. The blooming peach blossoms were set off by his perfect cheeks and suddenly lost all color. This man was Prince Long Qing of the Yan Kingdom. All the divine priests under Mo Li, the deputy headmaster of the Yutian Academy of West Hill, as well as the envoys from various countries all stood up. The academy students who were in a heated discussion suddenly fell silent. Even the professors and doctors of the academy who were used to the opening ceremony of the second floor could not help but clap their hands in admiration when they saw the young prince walking through the sunlight and flowers. People could clearly see the not-so-rugged mountain path at the foot of the mountain when they stood on the stone ground of the academy. It was quiet, and no one spoke. Time ticked by, but no one walked towards the mountain. It seems that I have to go first. In the dead silence caused by the tension, a person's voice suddenly sounded. To everyone's surprise, the first to climb the mountain and move towards the second floor of the academy was not a student of the academy, nor was it Prince Long Qing, who was regarded as the son of God by all the believers of Haotian Taoism. It was a young monk. The monk was about 20 years old and had a handsome appearance. He wore a tattered but clean monk's robe and a pair of straw sandals. The edges of the straw sandals were almost rotting away. One could imagine how many barren hills and treacherous rivers these shoes had accompanied him through. However, if one looked closely, one could see that there was not a single speck of dirt on his feet. His feet were as white as a lotus. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 151. Princely Pei Yan looked at the young monk who was walking towards the back of the academy. He frowned and looked unhappy. He had come as a representative of the royal family to attend the opening of the second floor of the academy. His main purpose was to ensure that the agreement would not be interfered with. He had never thought that the students of the academy would be able to defeat Prince Long Qing. However, after such a long time, no student of the Tang Academy had bravely stood up. Instead, a young monk in a tattered robe had taken the lead. As a prince of the Tang Empire, it was inevitable that he would be a little angry. Who is this monk? He frowned and looked at the official from the Ministry of Rites beside him. The official lifted his sleeves to wipe the sweat off his forehead and replied softly, "He is a traveling monk from the Dada Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom. He made an application in advance and was allowed to enter the academy today." Li Pei Yan was slightly stunned. He wanted to say something but eventually shut his mouth. Unlike what people imagined, when the second floor of the academy opened, it never cared whether those who wanted to enter the second floor were students of the academy or not. The academy welcomed all challengers regardless of nationality or sect. To be able to enter the second floor of the academy meant that one would have the opportunity to meet the headmaster of the academy and receive his personal teachings. This treatment was like the sweet dew that Haotian had sprinkled on the human world. It was like honey in front of a honey peak. No one could resist this temptation. Therefore, since many years ago, whenever the second floor of the academy opened, young talents from the South Jin Kingdom, the Great River Kingdom and the Yueluan Kingdom would travel thousands of miles to the academy to try their luck. What was strange was that the sects and countries of these young prodigies also maintained an interesting silence regarding this matter. The reason why these countries and sects kept quiet was actually not complicated. They could not extinguish the young talents yearning for the second floor of the academy from the bottom of their hearts. They believed that the headmaster of the academy's moral character was as pure as the clouds and his heart was as broad as a mountain. He would never interfere with the internal affairs of other cultivation sections. More importantly, they believed that the headmaster of the academy would treat all the disciples of the second floor equally and never hide anything. Since that was the case, if these young talents from the South Jin Kingdom and Yueluan Kingdom could really enter the second floor, they could not only learn the exquisite skills of the academy, but also build a close relationship between their sects and the academy. It could even indirectly cause the Tang Empire to be friendly to them. Why wouldn't they remain silent? It was a pity that the opening date of the second floor of the academy was uncertain, and there were very few talents selected. Over the years, most of the students on the second floor of the academy were disciples of the academy, and only a few lucky ones from countries outside the Tang Empire. Even so, young talents from all over the world flocked to the second floor every time it opened. The young monk from the Yueluan Kingdom, who was wearing a shabby frock and straw sandals, was probably one of them. The West Hill Divine Palace regarded itself as the only orthodox cultivator in the world and the spokesperson of Haotian. Naturally, it was impossible for them to be like the sects of other countries and countries. Except for an unknown fat lad, no young man from West Hill had tried to enter the second floor for many years, until Prince Long Qing came to the academy today. Not only Princely Peiyan's expression was a little ugly, but the academy professor who presided over the opening ceremony of the second floor also looked very ugly. The divine talisman who hid in a small building in the academy did not know much about the state and strength of this year's academy students. But in his opinion, since they were students of the academy, how could they hide behind the crowd like a timid rabbit? Another 3 young cultivators from foreign countries walked bravely to the back of the mountain of the academy under the ardent gaze of their companions. After a long period of silence, the group of academy students finally became a little restless. Many people could not help but look at their spiritual leader, Mr. Xie. Xie Qingyun quietly looked at the crowd in the distance. He looked at the young prince who seemed to have taken away all the brilliance of the world since he came to Chang'an. He could not help but feel a little bitter in his mouth. He had been observing him and paying attention to him, but he did not pay attention to him at all. How painful it was. He had painstakingly studied and cultivated for so many years. He even gave up the Tanhua position in the South Jin Kingdom. He came all the way to the academy and did not hesitate to vomit blood to climb to the second floor. Wasn't it all for the sake of becoming the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy? However, all this would become a bubble in front of the more powerful and dazzling peer. Suddenly, this Mr. Xie, who came from a prominent family in the South Jin Kingdom and had been spoiled since childhood, remembered the 2 reprimands he had heard in the old library and the study room. One reprimand was from the Princess of Tang and the other was from Ning Quebec. He looked back at his classmates in the academy, hoping to see Ning Ke, but he was a little disappointed. After a moment of silence, he thought of nearly 20 years of hard study in diligent cultivation. A trace of determination and relief gradually appeared on his face. He stood up and took a deep breath. Looking at Lin Chuan Wangying and his classmates, he said forcefully, "This is our academy. Do we have to be the last to go up the mountain?" A happy smile appeared on Wang Ying's young face. He cupped his hands and said, "Brother Xie, I'll go with you." The academy students were excited and began to cheer softly. They lined the path to see the 6 students of course of magic skills off. The slight uproar of the academy students only attracted some curious gazes. As for the West Hill Divine Palace and the Yen Kingdom envoys gathered under the umbrella, no one looked at them. The eyes of everyone under the umbrella and even many people outside the umbrella were still fixed on Prince Long Qing, who was as beautiful and calm as a peach blossom in winter. The small disturbance in the Victory House the day before had gradually spread. Many people knew that Prince Long Qing, who was solemn and powerful in the judicial department of the Divine Hall, had suffered a small loss in the hands of an ordinary student of the academy. However, those who knew the inside story knew that it was just some trivial things like drinking and talking. These things could not affect Prince Longqing's position in their hearts. As long as Prince Longqing had not really been defeated, he was still the perfect son of God. Since the beginning of the academy professor's announcement, some young cultivators had walked to the back of the academy. However, Prince Longqing had been silent. His eyes were as calm as a still pond, and he had been focused on the air in front of him. Longqing, when could you be affected by such a small figure? Prince Longqing suddenly curled his lips and said silently in his heart. Then, he glanced at the guy hiding in the corner outside the crowd with his emotionless eyes, and then slowly stood up. It was just a very simple action of standing up, but it caused a burst of excitement and discussion among the crowd. Prince Longqing is going to start climbing the mountain. Will he be the one who climbs the highest? Of course. He is a powerhouse in the upper see-through state. I even believe that he will directly climb to the top. Speaking of which, he is already a bigwig in the judicial department of the Divine Hall, but he still wants to participate in the examination of the second floor of the academy. The academy is really too arrogant. Can't they directly give him a place? I suspect that the academy and the Tang Empire want to take this opportunity to shock the West Hill Divine Palace. With so many pairs of eyes watching, can the academy play tricks during the process of climbing the mountain? How can the headmaster of the academy play tricks when recruiting disciples? Those who think so are really stupid. The whispered discussions entered Prince Longqing's ears very clearly, but there was still no expression on his perfect face, as if he did not hear it at all. Under the gaze of countless people, he raised his right hand and lightly touched between his eyebrows. Then, he looked up at the scorching sun in the sky calmly, and the pious and benevolent expression on his face all turned into calmness. Then, he started to walk towards the back of the academy. I just can't stand this kind of pretentiousness. The whole world knows that you are fierce and invincible, and they are all waiting to see how fierce and invincible you are. But in the end, you just have to wait until the end, when everyone can't help but want to curse, but in the end, you slowly stand up, duff your sleeves, pull up your pants, and hold your sword upside down to pose. Do you think you are squatting in the latrine? Chu Yuxian suddenly appeared beside Ning Ke, which startled him. Then, Ning Ke was amused by this long series of harsh mockery. He shook his head and said, sarcastic, too sarcastic. You flatter me. Chu Yuxian looked at him and said with a smile, that day at the Victory House, I didn't go in, but I heard what happened later. You are the real sarcastic one, and I am the direct one. There is not much difference. Ning Ke said with a smile. Chu Yuxian looked at the gradually disappearing bamboo forest at the foot of the mountain, and sighed and said, it is a pity that you can't humiliate that prince in such a situation today. Speaking of which, our classmates are really narrow-minded guys. You are clearly fighting for the academy's reputation in front of the West Hill people and the Yen people, but that bastard Zhong Dajuan still said such words. I think they are just asking for humiliation today. Daring to climb the mountain with Prince Longqing, that is also courage. Ning Ke said while looking at the bamboo forest at the foot of the mountain. Haotian was beautiful today, and the air was especially clean and bright. Under the azure sky was the clearest world, and people could see very far away. They could even clearly see the stone path in the mountain behind the academy. Passing through the visual barrier near the building on the horizon, people who stayed in the academy saw that some people had already walked up the mountain path. The person in front was the young monk, and then more and more people walked up the stone path. Xie Qingyun and the 6 people from the course of magic skills were among them, and the plain robe of Prince Longqing was the last one. Although the mountain was high and dangerous, it could not be a real obstacle for these young cultivators. This kind of assessment seemed like a child's play, but in fact, when the second floor of the academy was opened, the assessment for the headmaster of the academy to choose a core disciple would not be a child's play, so the mountain path would not be easy to walk. When the young cultivators really entered the sloping mountain path, their speed suddenly became extremely slow. In the eyes of the audience, their bodies seemed to be a joint of an extremely heavy boulder. Every step they took seemed so painful and strenuous, as if they were fighting against the whole world. The young monk from the Yueluan kingdom seemed to be relatively relaxed, and only one person on the sloping mountain path did not seem to be affected at all. He walked as usual as if he was walking on flat ground, and calmly surpassed his peers. His sleeves were slightly swaying behind him, and he did not look like he was carrying out a difficult challenge, but more like he was climbing the mountain to enjoy the scenery. It was Prince Longqing. Well, in this chapter, Chu Yuxian scolded Prince Longqing, and I scolded myself on behalf of everyone. I really can't do anything about it. If I could write more every day, I wouldn't make everyone feel constipated like me. Fortunately, I will go home on the 23rd, and from the 24th, my life will be normal. Alas. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 152. Every time they lifted their feet or waved their arms, it was as if they had to use all their strength. The young people walking on the stone path at the back of the academy were like puppets being carried by cotton strings. Although they could not see their expressions, the people in the academy could clearly feel the pain they were suffering. The second floor's method of selecting students was actually this simple, but behind the simplicity, there was such a miracle. The outstanding young cultivators from all over the world would become clumsy puppets once they stepped on the slanting stone path. It was a shocking scene. No one could guess what had happened on the mountain path except for the people involved. Even Priest Moli, who had been immersed in the cultivation world for many years, did not dare to guess before experiencing it for himself. But everyone believed that the academy would not let these young people be really hurt. Looking at the monotonous scene for a long time, it was inevitable that it would be boring. Looking at the movements of the crowd around the academy, it was unlikely that anyone would try to climb the back of the academy. The bigwigs, including the envoys from various countries, relaxed a little. They began to look left and right under the shade of the umbrellas, talking to others. The academy had prepared some simple food, and the bigwigs had brought their own maidservants. Tea and snacks were placed on the table for a while, adding to the excitement of the conversation. The main targets of the envoys from various countries were Prince Li Peiyan, Princess Li Yu, and Priest Moli, the deputy headmaster of the Revelation Institute. The surrounding countries had always been very gentle and subservient to the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, which no other power dared to oppose. As for which side to submit to, it was not their focus at all. At least for now, this submission had to be on both sides. Other than building a good relationship with the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, the most important reason for the envoys from various countries to come to the academy today was to see if there were any young people from their countries who were lucky enough to enter the second floor. Even if no one could enter the second floor, as long as there was a real talent in cultivation, they would pay attention to it on behalf of their respective imperial courts. The envoy from the Great River Kingdom was chatting with a deacon from the West Hill Divine Palace beside him. He perfectly hid his humility between laughter and exquisite flattery. Suddenly, he saw the earth dragon coming from afar, and his expression changed. He stood up abruptly and looked in that direction, trembling. What's going on? The so-called earthen dragons were actually 4 deacons of the academy carrying stretchers. Because they were moving so fast, their boots broke the grass and kicked up the soil. That was why there was a cloud of dust and the momentum of flying dragons flying close to the ground. The 4 deacons of the academy carried the stretchers from afar and arrived at the front yard in no time. They were not out of breath and their faces were not flushed. They looked extremely calm. It could be seen that they had done this many times over the years. The envoy from the Great River Kingdom covered his forehead and looked incredulously at the unconscious young cultivator from the Great River Kingdom on the stretcher. He sighed repeatedly. He had never thought that the first person to be defeated in the examination of the second floor of the academy would be a citizen of his country. The real reason why he was depressed was that he did not know how he was defeated. The envoy walked to the stretcher and asked angrily, "How did climbing up the mountain make him faint?" An academy deacon beside the stretcher answered expressionlessly, "Fainting is a common thing in the academy. He would vomit blood even when climbing up the stairs, let alone climbing up the mountain. Please move aside." The deacon of the academy rudely pushed away the envoy of the Great River Kingdom, carried the stretcher and continued to run to the back of the academy, leaving behind a yellow earthen dragon and a few unclear complaints. "Move aside. Boil the water." The 4 academy deacons carried the second climber back on the stretcher. There were instructors of the academy waiting with ginger soup and medicine. "Move aside. There must be a lot of boiling water today. Don't block the way." The academy deacon returned again with the handle of the stretcher in his hand. Their shouts to clear the way were definitely more colorful than the shouts of the Tang officials when they went out. Seeing this scene, Chu Yuxian could not help but look back at Ning Ke as he recalled the scenes from last year. Ning Ke looked at the 4 deacons running back and forth between the back of the mountain and the front yard and opened his mouth slightly. This scene was very familiar to him and even a little warm. However, the experience of climbing up the stairs last year was after all a pain that made his fingers tremble and his chest and abdomen gave birth to some nausea. His face was slightly pale and he sighed painfully, "It's still the 4 of you." In the area not covered by clouds and mist in the back of the mountain of the academy, the young cultivators on the stone path walked slower and slower. From time to time, someone fainted in pain and was quickly carried away. Xie Qingyun walked in the middle. Although it was difficult, he still persisted. The young monk from the Yueluan kingdom seemed to be relatively relaxed. His tattered frock fluttered in the mountain wind. He walked at the front of the team and looked around from time to time. It seemed that he was not looking for scenery but more like he was looking for a way out. Prince Long Qing held his hands behind his back and climbed up the mountain to look at the scenery. He walked leisurely all the way and constantly passed the climbers in front of him. There was no pride or contempt on his face. He was only calm no matter how many people he passed or how many young cultivators he saw by the mountain path. Even when he passed the young monk, he did not look at him with the corner of his eyes. There was a thick fog at the end of the mountain path. The people who stayed in the academy were silent. They looked at the slanting mountain path in the distance, puzzled and shocked by the magic of the mountain path. They wondered what kind of inhibition the academy had set there that could make it so difficult and painful for these outstanding young cultivators from various countries to walk. Ning Ke, who stood in the corner, was also thinking and analyzing. But his focus was not on the mountain path, but the thick fog at the end of the mountain path. Prince Long Qing had already arrived in front of the fog. If he wanted to climb the mountain later, he had to at least enter the fog. Since that was the case, no matter how dangerous the sloping mountain path was, it had nothing to do with him. He had to go through it. Prince Long Qing came to the front of the thick fog that covered the mountainside. Without any hesitation, he calmly walked in. After a while, the young monk from the Yueluan kingdom, who looked around curiously, also came to the fog. Looking at the clouds and mist in front of him that hid an unknown number of ancient trees and mountain souls of tens of thousands of years old, the young monk, who had always appeared to be indifferent, had an unprecedentedly serious expression on his face. He looked at the mist quietly and did not take a step forward. Prince Long Qing disappeared in the mountain fog. For a long time, no one else could walk through the stone path at the mountainside and into the fog. Half of the climbers who wanted to enter the second floor of the academy had been carried back by the 4 deacons. Only Xie Qingyun and a few others were still climbing the lower part of the mountain path with difficulty. As for the young monk from the Yueluan kingdom, who had shown a good state and was placed high hopes by some people, he seemed to have encountered some kind of problem and hesitated to move forward. Looking at the current situation, the people in the academy who were watching the ascent had already made a judgment in their hearts that no one could defeat Prince Longqing. Although this was expected by many, they still could not help but be shocked and speechless when they saw the scene unfold and Prince Longqing's strength that far surpassed his peers. The West Hill Divine Palace is indeed the ancestor of all cultivation sects and a place respected by the common people. The Revelation Institute is indeed a wonderful place of metaphysics in the world. Prince Longqing climbed the mountain with ease. How can others compare to such a celestial being? The envoy of the Yen kingdom looked at his prince who was proud of the crowd and was already extremely proud. He did not forget to turn sideways and flatter the people from the West Hill Divine Palace. Priest Moli slightly stroked his beard with an unusually calm expression. Only the luster deep in his eyes revealed his pride and joy at this time. He said indifferently, Longqing is talented and favored by Haotian divine light. The divine hall has entrusted him with the important task of judgment. Although the academy is also a noble and mysterious place, it is really not enough to boast that he climbed the mountain behind the academy. Although he said it was not enough to boast, everyone knew that it was a compliment. The envoy of the Yen kingdom hurriedly said a few more words and then turned to the Tang officials. He stopped smiling and said indifferently, speaking of which, the Tang Empire has gathered many famous and virtuous officials. Unfortunately, there seems to be no outstanding person in this year's academy. In the eyes of the Yen kingdom, the Tang Empire was undoubtedly a cruel and fierce beast. They had never liked the Tangs. Today they had such a rare opportunity to attack the ambition and confidence of the Tang Empire, so they naturally would not miss it. The envoy of the Yen kingdom did not dare to provoke the prince or the princess of the Tang Empire, so he did not say this out loud. However, he did not deliberately control his voice either. The faint sarcasm floated along with the indifferent and emotionless words. Under the bright yellow umbrella, the Tang officials' faces were extremely ugly. 5 of the 6 students in the course of magic skills in the academy had already been defeated. The only one who continued to climb, Xie Qingyun, was from the South Jin Kingdom. Even if he was a student from the South Jin Kingdom, it seemed that he would not be a match for Prince Longqing. In this case, the younger generation of the Tang Empire had suffered a crushing defeat in today's mountain climbing test on the 2nd floor. Prince Li Peiyan's expression was somewhat gloomy. He tightly grasped his sleeves and said in a low voice with no expression, "If I had known this would happen, I should have written a letter to Su Shi and asked him to release Wang Jinglu. At least the Tang Empire would not have lost so much face." Sitting beside him, Li Yu glanced at him and said with slight mockery, "Uncle, isn't it because of you that Wang Jinglu was banished to the Defender General of the State?" Li Peiyan glanced at her with a somewhat ugly expression. After a moment of silence, he frowned and said, "Why mention this again? Speaking of which, although Jinglu is known to be invincible below the knowing destiny state, Longqing has already stepped into the knowing destiny state. Even if he comes back, he may not be a match for Longqing. Is he not as good as Longqing, or do you not want him to be like Longqing?" Li Yu's lips curled up slightly and she said mockingly, "Uncle, didn't you come here personally to see Prince Longqing enter the 2nd floor, so that you can rest assured?" Li Peiyan replied calmly, "You have to know that this is His Majesty's will." Hearing this, Li Yu was silent. Today, when the 2nd floor opened, Prince Longqing entered first as expected. Although this was an agreement between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, as the princess of the Tang Empire, she could not help but feel extremely unhappy when she thought of the words of the envoy from the Yen Kingdom and saw the unfathomable expression of Priest Moli. However, as previously discussed, Wang Jinglu had not returned, and the students of the academy were not strong enough. Who could win back some face for the Tang Empire? She subconsciously glanced at the silent students of the academy. However, even she herself did not know who she was looking for, or which faces of the students of the academy she was trying to find the last glimmer of hope and brilliance. In the old library in the depths of the academy, the window facing the west had been pushed open. When the spring breeze, accompanied by the fragrance of flowers, entered the building, the figure of a chubby lad appeared by the window. Outstanding young cultivators from all over the world had previously passed by the old library, but neither Prince Long Qing nor the young monk had noticed him by the window upstairs. Chen Pipi's eyes flew over the square eaves of the study room above the wetland and fell on Ning Kai, who was in the dark corner of the stone platform. He took a bite of the cold bun in his hand and mumbled to himself, "How long are you going to wait?" On the meadow outside the academy, Sang Sang had already opened the big black umbrella. She stood in the shadow in silence and occasionally looked up at the dazzling white sunlight in the blue sky to confirm the time. Then she quickly took out the sunscreen lotion from Chenjinji Cosmetics store and sprayed it on her face. Then she spread it evenly with her small hands and rubbed it to the bottom of her muscles. She knew that the test to enter the second floor of the academy was to climb the mountain. She knew that her young master would definitely climb the mountain. Since that was the case, there was no need for her to be anxious. Why must he be the last to set off, and then continuously surpass others along the way to become the first to climb the mountain? This prince is really pretentious and hateful. Chu Yuxian took out the exquisite pastries wrapped in a handkerchief and took a piece for himself. Then he handed the rest to Ning Kai for him to eat. Ning Kai thought to himself, if the last to climb the mountain is pretentious and hateful, then what kind of person am I? At this time, inside and outside the academy, the officials and students of the Tang Empire did not look good. Situilan and the other students of the academy were even more ashamed. Ning Kai looked at everyone's expression and felt the atmosphere. He murmured, "Why don't I try?" His voice was soft, but Chu Yuxian heard it clearly. His hand holding the pastries suddenly froze. He stared at Ning Kai's face and shouted in disbelief, "What did you say? You want to try? Don't tell me you want to climb the mountain." In the quiet front yard of the academy, Chu Yuxian's exclamation reverberated. Everyone was stunned and subconsciously turned to look at the source of the voice. Ning Kai looked at Chu Yuxian and said helplessly, "Xian, can your voice be louder?" So Chu Yuxian really jumped up and shouted in shock, "You really want to climb the mountain? You really want to enter the second floor?" At this time, everyone inside and outside the academy heard and saw clearly. Countless pairs of eyes turned to the corner and looked at Ning Quebec. They were so shocked that they could not speak. Ning Kai took the pastries from Chu Yuxian and wrapped them in a handkerchief. He smiled and said, "Leave it for me to eat along the way." After saying this, he walked towards the back of the mountain of the academy. "Tomorrow I will return from Fujian to Heilongjiang, and I will be flying vertically across China. I will arrive home at night. If I can write, I will update. If I don't have time, I will write 10,000 words the day after tomorrow. As for the matter of the plot, you can say that I wrote it slowly or that I wrote poorly, but I don't think so. Jiang Yi is the most solid story I've ever written in my entire life. If there was really a need for water, it wouldn't be like this." Again, I'll repeat the words that the brothers and sisters of the Chidian family have repeated countless times. If I could write 10,000 words a day, this plot would naturally be extremely well written and full of flavor. But in reality, I can only write 3,000 to 4,000 words a day. Naturally, it would cause everyone, including me and all of you, to feel somewhat dissatisfied and annoyed. I understand, but I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. Fortunately, this bitter life is coming to an end. Many years from now, I hope that I'll be able to deeply understand how precious these 14 days of bitter wealth were in my life. Finally, I sincerely appeal to everyone to vote for me. Because I am worried that I will not have a chance to get votes tomorrow, I held back a smile for everyone to see. Of course, this paragraph is not counted in the word count. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 153. The hero was always the last one to appear. On the battlefield filled with yellow sand, several deputy generals fought for a long time with knives, but they could do nothing to each other or were beaten back by the other. Then, a silver-robed young general suddenly pulled the reins and rushed over. With a spear, he knocked all the enemies off their horses, and then stood in the wilderness with his spear in hand. The twilight shone on his face, making him look extremely cool and pretentious. In the dark and rainy streets, the underlings of the gang slashed at each other with watermelon knives. The blood was more violent and dense than the rain. From the west to the south, there were dozens of corpses lying messily on the ground. Then, the black-robed Jianghu Bigshot, holding a steel knife, shouted and waved it. It was like a blood dragon, killing from one end to the other. No one could withstand his knife, and no one could survive under his feet. He was extremely powerful. As for why the silver-robed young general and the black-robed Bigshot didn't make a move at the beginning, but waited for their subordinates and underlings to shed blood and be miserable for a long time before they stepped out. Of course, it wasn't because they were like storytellers who habitually procrastinated. Instead, it was because these pretentious criminals knew that only by enduring for a long period of time would they be able to show off their elegance at the end. After the opening of the second floor, many people began to climb the mountain one after another, including Prince Longqing who had already set off. However, Ning Ke did not move at all. He stood silently in the corner and waited for this moment. He could explain that he did not move because he wanted to observe the young cultivators and analyze the possible problems they might encounter when climbing the mountain. But deep down in his heart, he had to admit that the more important reason was that those climbers who were struggling on the sloping mountain path were not his subordinates, nor were they his deputy generals. He did not care about those people's lives. Since he had no confidence in entering the second floor, why not enjoy the pleasure of being the last to make an appearance? The hero was always the last one to appear. Even if the hero was still the superior and inhumanly perfect Prince Longqing, at least at this moment, the last one to appear was undoubtedly the hero of the moment. Ning Ke's idea was perfectly realized. When he took the pastries wrapped in Chu Yoxian's handkerchief and slowly walked towards the back of the academy, countless pairs of eyes around the courtyard were attracted to his figure. Those gazes were filled with countless complicated emotions. Some were surprised, some were confused, but most of them were confused. It had been a long time since the opening of the second floor. Anyone with eyes could see that Prince Longqing would definitely win today. At this moment, how could someone be so ungrateful as to disturb the solemn and sacred scene of Prince Longqing waiting for him to shine? He seems to be a student of the academy. The envoy of the Great River Kingdom looked at Ning Ke's clothes and frowned. Is he a hidden powerhouse of the academy? The 6 students of the course of magic skills are all on the mountain. 4 of them have already been carried back. Looking at the shocked faces of the instructors, they don't seem to know what's going on either. Among the students of the academy, Zhong Dajuan suppressed his shock and looked at the back of Ning Ke, who was the center of the discussion. He sneered and said, "What is he up to this time? Hasn't he been humiliated enough this year?" Situelan subconsciously took a step forward and clenched her hands in her sleeves. She looked at Ning Ke in front of her, her face full of curiosity and worry. Although she knew that Ning Ke was not as useless and despicable as his classmate said, she really couldn't understand why he wanted to climb the mountain at this time. She also couldn't figure out why he believed that he would have the opportunity to enter the second floor of the academy. Under the broad golden parasol, Li Yu looked at the young man who was not strange, but also not very familiar. She revealed a thoughtful expression. She recalled the scenes on the journey back from the grassland last year, and recalled the old man Liu Qingqian's smile and resolute words. She did not know why she had such strong confidence and hope in him, but she did not know where this confidence and hope came from. Li Peiyan followed her gaze and looked at Ning Ke with a serious and cold expression. As a prince of the Tang Empire, he was very willing to see a young man of the Tang Empire in the academy stand up and win back some face for the empire. But he did not want this event to have too many variables. Priest Moli did not think that Ning Ke was qualified to be a variable. He lightly glanced at him and no longer cared. At this time, Prince Long Qing had already entered the thick fog on the mountainside. Perhaps he would succeed in the next moment. In his view, whether this student stood up at this time to play to the gallery or was instructed by someone in the academy, it would only make the West Hill divine glory and the prince more perfect. For those who were not strong-willed and easily shaken, gazes were heavy, especially when there were so many bigwigs around the academy's stone platform. If they gathered on one person, it could even crush a thin student. But for Ning Ke, the gazes of others were the most weightless and powerless existence in the world, no matter how many gazes gathered together. What he was going to do had nothing to do with these people, so the emotions in these gazes had nothing to do with him. The academy professor who was responsible for presiding over the opening ceremony of the second floor stood expressionlessly beside the stone platform. He had already heard the instructor's introduction and knew that Ning Ke was a student of the academy. He also knew the rumors about this person this year. Why? The professor asked. Ning Ke honestly smiled and asked with hands folded in front, not aloud. I didn't hear about the registration time limit you mentioned before. Indeed not. I just heard that you pretended to be sick and gave up the semester exam last year because you were afraid of losing to your competitors. So I don't understand why you want to climb the mountain today. If giving up the exam and climbing the mountain are logically contradictory. Ning Ke looked at the professor and calmly explained, then I dare to climb the mountain today, which means that the rumors in the academy and the accusations against me are all false. Looking at this ordinary student who dared to speak in front of him, the professor smiled slightly. His two silver-stained eyebrows fluttered in the spring breeze, and he looked quite happy. But he did not step aside. Instead, he continued to ask with a trace of interest, but I still want to know why you want to climb the mountain today. Ning Ke answered with a smile, if those people from the West Hill Divine Palace or the envoys from the Yen Kingdom asked me, I would definitely give them an answer that would shock them all. But since it's you, of course, I have to answer honestly. I want to climb the mountain because I want to. The professor laughed and stroked his white beard. He shook his head and praised, what a good answer. This is the best answer I've heard in the past few years. Then he curiously asked, if the people who asked you were those charlatans from the West Hill or those fence-sitters from the Yen Kingdom, how would you answer? If they asked me why I want to climb the mountain, I would say, Ning Ke smiled a little embarrassedly and said, because the mountain is there. The academy professor was stunned and his fingers that were stroking his beard slightly stiffened. Then he laughed out loud and looked at Ning Ke as if he was a promising student. He praised, this is also a good answer. Go. The professor smiled and said, it's just that the mountain path is dangerous and rugged. If you suddenly feel that you don't want to climb any further halfway, then you can come down. If anyone dares to mock you, I will stand up for you. Ning Ke smiled and bowed deeply to the ground. Then he left. The professor watched him walk into the quiet alley and stroked his beard. He thought that this year's academy students were really not all good-for-nothings and nodded with satisfaction. Ning Ke was very familiar with the road up the mountain, at least he was familiar with the part of the road before going up. The alley, the wetland, the bamboo forest and the small building were all familiar with the scenery along the way. Even the bluestone beside the lake remembered his footsteps. When he came to the old library, he looked up and waved his hand to say hello. The chubby Chin Pippi leaned against the window and waved his hand to the people below. He didn't want Prince Long Qing and those climbers to see him, so they couldn't see him. He wanted Ning Ke to see him, so Ning Ke could naturally see him. If you really can't climb up, don't try to be brave. Chen Pippi kindly reminded. Can't you say something auspicious? Ning Ke looked up at him and said, how come no one, including you, thinks that I can climb to the top? The mountain road is not so easy to climb. Chen Pippi spread out his plump hands and said sincerely, what's more, compared with Long Qing, you are really a kitten or a puppy. Ning Ke didn't bother to pay attention to him. He waved his hand and walked to the side of the old library. Suddenly, he thought of something and stopped. He turned back and asked unwillingly, is there really no back door? Chen Pippi held the window frame and shouted, die. Ning Ke smiled and shook his head. He continued to walk. When he bypassed the old library, he found that there really was a back door. He had spent a whole year in the old library. He had seen the scenery downstairs from upstairs and walked around downstairs. He clearly remembered that there used to be a grey dilapidated wall here, but now there was a door here. Behind the door was a blue stone path with green bamboos on both sides. He gradually climbed up until he slid into the dense forest and grass on the mountainside far away from the bamboo forest. Stepping through the door, Ning Ke walked up the mountain along the path in the bamboo forest. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. The mountain path carried his body higher and higher as he walked. Gradually, he passed the wall below and passed the picturesque bamboo forest. When he looked back, he could faintly see the people in the academy in the distance. The mountain path ahead became narrower and narrower. The big blue stone slabs were replaced by smaller stones. There was no bird singing in the forest beside the path. It was strangely quiet. As soon as his right foot stepped on the mountain path paved with fine stones, Ning Ke suddenly frowned and his face instantly turned as pale as snow. An indescribable sharp pain struck his brain from the soles of his feet that were stepping on the surface of the mountain path. The sudden pain made his legs weak and he almost fell down. But he forced himself to support himself on the ground. After a muffled groan, he stood up again and looked to the side of the mountain path. Between the green forest on the side of the road, one could see the cliffs covered in moss. If one looked carefully, one could probably make out that the lines under the thick moss were actually some large characters carved on the stone. However, the strokes of the characters were painted in cinnabar red, and after countless years of wind and rain, they had long faded away. What a powerful psyche power attack! These are also the words left by the divine talisman master. Ning Ke stared at the stone engravings on the cliff in the forest, and his hands hanging beside him slightly trembled. At this moment, there were hundreds of thousands of invisible steel needles piercing through his soles. If ordinary people encountered such pain, they might have already fallen to the ground and cried out in pain. However, although his face was pale and his hands trembled, he was abnormally clear-headed, as if the pain had no effect on him. Previously in the academy, Ning Ke looked at the mountain path from afar and saw Xie Qingyun and others walking extremely slowly on the mountain path with great difficulty. Although he could not see their expressions, he could vaguely perceive their pain. Then he guessed what kind of inhibition was on the mountain path. But he did not expect that the assessment of the second floor of the academy was so overbearing and barbaric that such a powerful divine talisman was used at the beginning. Now he finally understood why those outstanding young cultivators from all over the world would become puppets on this mountain path and walk so slowly and with great difficulty. Under the wonderful divine talisman on the cliff, any natural environment around the mountain path could become a danger to prevent people from climbing the mountain. You could not avoid it and could only break through by force. Ning Ke frowned tightly and looked at his right foot that had landed on the pebbled mountain path. Suddenly, he smiled nervously and exerted strength in his waist and abdomen. He leaned forward and lifted his left foot that had fallen behind him and stepped on the pebbled mountain path. He stepped heavily and hard, as if he was going to break the mountain path paved with pebbles. Countless invisible needles poked out from the cracks of the pebbles and pierced deep into the soles of his feet through the hard soles of his boots. The instant numbness was quickly replaced by extreme pain, and then it was clearly transmitted into his brain. Ning Kei's face became paler, but his frowning brows gradually relaxed. He took a deep breath as if he enjoyed it, and then waved his hands and continued to walk forward. Intentionally or unintentionally, attentively or stealthily looking at Ning Kei from the corner of their eyes, genuinely concerned or just curious, or with a mocking attitude, when Ning Kei appeared on the mountain path, many people looked at him and began to pay attention to his every move. Seeing Ning Kei step on the mountain path and fall to the ground after taking a step, some people could not help but shake their heads, and some people laughed mockingly. Priest Moli was talking indifferently with the envoy of the Yen Kingdom, and it seemed that he did not care about what happened on the mountain path at all. But after seeing Ning Kei fall, he could not help but shake his head contemptuously. After watching for such a long time, he could vaguely guess what kind of inhibition the academy had set on the mountain path. At this time, seeing that Ning Kei was so badly suppressed by the talisman power, he was sure that Ning Kei was at most in a no-doubt state. It was probably a good level in the academy's course of magic skills. But with such a state, he wanted to make a big splash after enduring for so many days. That was too wishful thinking. Among the students of the academy, Zhong Dajuan pointed at the mountain path and sneered, "Playing to the gallery is just playing to the gallery. He only wants to attract attention, but he doesn't think about how much damage this will bring to the academy's reputation." Situelan could not help but gasp when she saw Ning Kei fall down on the mountain road. Hearing this mockery, she could not help but glare at him angrily. She took Jin Wuxi's little hand and took 2 steps forward, pulling the distance between them and the academy students further. "Your hand is a little cold." Jin Wuxi looked at her worriedly and said. Although the granddaughter of the chancellor was more worried about Xie Qingyun, who was still struggling on the mountain path, she was still worried about her female companion, because it seemed that Ning Kei did not have any chance. "It's okay. I just can't bear to see some people's faces." Situelan glanced at the classmates who were talking behind her and sneered, "Even if Ning Kei can only take 1 step on the mountain path, he is still better than these people who dare not even try." Jin Wuxi looked at the mountain path in the distant forest and said worriedly, "But it seems that Ning Kei can't take a second step." Situelan did not answer her, but just focused on the mountain path, silently cheering for the long-forgotten friend of the academy in her heart. Suddenly, a look of surprise appeared on her beautiful cheeks. She pointed to the distance and jumped up, shouting, "Look! Look! Ning Kei is starting to walk." Many people in the academy noticed what happened on the mountain path. They saw Ning Kei climb up with difficulty, paused for a moment, and moved his left foot to take a step forward. Then Ning Kei took the 2nd step, the 3rd step, and the 4th step. Although it was obvious that his body was trembling and his walking speed was very slow, it could be felt that he was walking more and more steadily, as if each step would deeply step into the hard mountain path. Someone among the academy students let out a cry of surprise. A young official from the Ministry of Rights of the Tang Empire stood up and looked at the mountain path, his face full of excitement. He did not know who the young student on the mountain path was, nor did he believe that he could defeat Prince Longqing and climb to the top of the mountain. But he felt that as the young student walked, the previously suppressed pride and confidence returned to him. In the corner, Chu Yuxian, who was taking out the 2nd bag of snacks to eat, opened his mouth wide in surprise, but forgot to put the pastries in. He looked at the figure on the mountain path and suddenly realized that he had never really known him. Li Yu looked at the mountain path and smiled after a moment of silence. Chen Pipi leaned against the window of the old library and looked at the direction of the mountain path. He sighed and said, "You are so cruel. Speaking of which, can you find anyone in this world who is more cruel to himself than you? I don't know, how far can you go? I still don't know." After saying this, he closed the window, and a few green leaves fluttered down. A few green leaves were swept down by the wind, swept over Ning Kei's shoulder, and fell to the ground. The green forest beside the mountain path was made up of many kinds of trees, but this section was mostly made up of bamboo trees. The edges of the bamboo leaves were thin and sharp, looking like pieces of sharp knives. The falling bamboo leaves on the mountain path did not look as sharp as knives, but were really as sharp as knives. With a soft sound, the bamboo leaf that brushed past Ning Kei's shoulder tore his clothes and cut his skin like a sharp knife, leaving a thin wound on his skin. Ning Kei looked at his shoulder, but did not see the tear in his clothes, no blood-stained bamboo leaves, and no bleeding wound. But he knew that it had indeed happened, because he could clearly feel a strong pain coming from his shoulder. He could even clearly feel the extremely unbearable strange feeling brought by the fine hairs left by the bamboo leaves in the wound. He raised his right hand and patted his shoulder, like dusting. Of course, this action could not get rid of the invisible wounds and pain left by the bamboo leaves. But the wonderful thing was that after this action, he felt much more relaxed and continued to walk forward. More bamboo leaves rustled down, brushing past his cheeks, brushing past the front of his robe, brushing past his back, falling on the pebbled mountain path. His clothes were the same as before, but there were many more invisible tears, and countless more unbearable pain for ordinary people. But his face was still the same, just a little paler. A gust of mountain wind blew, and countless bamboo leaves swirled into the air, and then dripped down like a rainstorm. Ning Kei walked in the rain of bamboo leaves, and no longer bothered to pull out the bamboo leaves that were about to fall on his body. He just kept walking in silence, and his bright eyes seemed to see the falling bamboo rain when he killed Yan Suqing in the lakeside house last year. He walked very carefully and forcefully. Every time he lifted his foot, he would step down heavily, and fine dust splashed from the soles of his boots. He ran over the messy bamboo leaves and walked through the pain. When the bamboo rain fell, it was the right time to kill people and climb the mountain. If he started late, he might have some glory, but it would be difficult to catch up. He could only walk alone on the mountain path, with no one in front or behind. Ning Kei was a little thirsty after walking, and his lips seemed to smoke. He wanted to drink some water, and then he heard the sound of flowing water beside the mountain path. Looking up, he saw a very thin clear spring flowing out of a cliff crack beside the path, and formed a puddle in the stone pit below, with a few weeds growing beside the puddle. He did not drink the mountain spring to his heart's content, or pity the weeds. Because the extremely thin spring water suddenly turned into a great waterfall of yellow, muddy white foam, and came crashing down on his face, trying to knock him unconscious on the moss-covered boulder at the bottom of the deep pool. He continued to walk forward, still forcefully and attentively. Every step was frightening and smoky. He walked slowly and firmly through the dense forest along the mountain path, and came to the middle of a meadow in the mountain. Without the shade of trees, the still hot afternoon sun unceremoniously sprinkled down, plated the meadow with a layer of bright red, as if it would ignite everything beside the mountain path. Ning Kei covered his forehead with his hand, looked up at the sky, and let out a tired sigh. Then he noticed from the corner of his eyes that there was a small lake beside the mountain path in front of him, reflecting light like a mirror. The lake was very small, very calm, and clear, and he could see the silent fish swimming in it. There was a light yellow flower growing between the stones beside the lake. A mountain breeze blew gently, and the little yellow flower trembled, looking extremely frightened. There was a slight ripple on the calm lake surface, and the little fish flicked its tail and disappeared into the stones. An angry sea appeared in front of Ning Quebec. The seawater was extremely blue and almost black, like the ink in the inkstone he was familiar with. The seawater kept rolling, setting off mountain-high waves, making angry roars, and constantly slapping the embankment and him standing on the embankment. His feet were like nails as he stood firmly on the embankment, staring at the ink-colored waves that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Even if his body felt as if it had been hit by a boulder, even if his drenched clothes were torn to pieces by the seawater and then brought back into the sea, he still did not take a step back. Then the sea stood up. The seawater, as dark as ink, stood up like a wall, no, like the earth. The sea cut the sky into two halves, and slowly pressed toward him. In this vertical sea that cut the sky and the earth, one could see a whirlpool larger than a mountain, and could see the silent and helpless seabirds flying around, and could see death. Then the sea fell down. Ning Ke also fell down. He fell heavily on the mountain path, frowned in pain, and spat out a mouthful of blood. The small lake in front of the road was still calm, with only a few ripples. A calm but proud voice came from the depths of the mountain fog. This kind of pride was different from the pride of Prince Long Qing, who pretended to be indifferent. The owner of the voice did not bother to hide his pride, nor did he deliberately show his pride. His pride came from the strength of his heart, which came from his nature, and did not make people feel disgusted at all. It is said that the handwriting on the cliff of the mountain path was engraved by the predecessors of the academy. After the inhibition is opened, those who intend to break through the inhibition will have to endure the pain and power hidden in the talisman, and then the pain and power of the mountain path will be greater. The calm and proud voice continued, "Many years ago, I fought with eldest senior brother. Although you all know eldest senior brother's temperament, and he wouldn't really be ruthless to me, I still couldn't beat him. So, in a fit of anger, I crushed the mold that teacher used to make plum cakes. So, teacher also got angry, and then made a cruel decision to punish me by walking on the mountain path." There were many reasons for the exclamations. Some were amazed by eldest brother's strength, some were amazed by second brother's strength, and he could crush the steel cake mold carved with talismans by the headmaster of the academy with his bare hands. Some were amazed by second brother's audacity to make the headmaster of the academy have no plum cakes to eat. When I walked on the mountain path that year, of course, I caused a much greater movement than this guy. In the end, I only fell to the ground and the Milky Way shattered and meteorites flew everywhere. But it is not easy for this guy to cause the wrath of the sea. Someone in the fog expressed his approval, and someone sighed and said, "But it seems that the more pain he can endure, the more pain he has to endure. This guy is too unlucky." "Unlucky?" someone asked angrily. "Unlucky." That person hurriedly explained. "None of you have seen youngest uncle. Only eldest brother and I have seen him." Second senior brother's mood eased up slightly, and he spoke proudly as if he felt that meeting the youngest uncle was something to be proud of. Youngest uncle once said that fate itself is a very cruel guy. If it wants to choose you to undertake a mission, then before it is sure that you are able to undertake this mission, it will try its best to break every bone in you, strip every bit of your flesh and blood, and let you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your will and mind be strong enough to be chosen by fate. In the thick fog, someone was talking about his memories, and someone was whispering, "Now it seems that second brother really admires youngest uncle the most. What's the big deal about breaking every bone? What's the big deal about stripping every bit of flesh and blood? What's the big deal about suffering the most extreme pain in the world? In Min Mountain and on the grassland, which bone of mine hasn't been broken? Which part of my body hasn't been hurt?" Ning Ke leaned on the hard mountain path, feeling the edges and corners of the thin stones under his body. He felt that all his bones had been smashed by the sea. But there was no fear in his eyes, only indifference. He struggled to get up with his hands on the ground, raised his sleeves to wipe the blood on his lips, and looked back at the long mountain path he had walked, shouting, "Last summer in the old library, I read the books you wrote. I saw the needles you hid in the books. I saw the bamboo leaves you hid in the books. I was knocked unconscious by that damn waterfall. I was also swallowed by that stinky sea, but so what? I am still standing here. Last year, I was an ordinary person who knew nothing. None of these could knock me down, not to mention that I am now a genius who has embarked on the cultivation path." It was quiet beside the clear lake on the meadow, and these arrogant shouts kept echoing. No birds flew out of the forest, and no insects raised their heads in surprise. Only the echoes gradually went away, until they disappeared, and then it was quiet again. Those small fish swam out from the stones, wagging their tails, and swam into the sky. Ning Ke suddenly looked up at the blue sky above his head without branches. He smiled and murmured, "Master Haotian, you have made me suffer so much these years. So you want to pay me back here?" He turned back and walked forward with difficulty while wiping the blood from his mouth and nose. His movements were slow and difficult, and he looked painful and embarrassed, but his face was full of a sincere and happy smile. Suddenly, he thought of something and said with self-blame, "Thank God. You should thank yourself first. You are so capable, and these are what you deserve." It was quiet for a long time at the end of the mountain mist. Second brother suddenly sighed and said, "Although this guy's state is bad and his cultivation is poor, his arrogance is really a bit mischievous." Another faint voice sounded, "Second brother, why do I feel that this guy's arrogance is a bit like yours?" The sun gradually set in the west. The forest and the mountain path were still bright, but the temperature dropped a little. Ning Ke walked with difficulty while wiping the blood and sweat. He walked very slowly and painfully, but he didn't care, because he had been fleeing since he was 4 years old, especially when he carried Sang Sang across the vast Min Mountain. It made him understand a truth that it didn't matter if he walked slowly. As long as he kept walking, one day he would reach the place he wanted to reach, and he would be able to surpass those who didn't dare to walk on the road. At this time, Ning Ke finally saw a fellow traveler. He glanced at the young man sitting on the road, and his eyes swept over the sword at his waist. He remembered that he had heard from his classmates in the academy that this person seemed to be a swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom, whose power was hostile to Xie Qingyan's family. But he didn't know whether he had anything to do with the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Thinking of Lu Bai, Ning Ke couldn't help but think of the words of the female professor in the Sword Forest this morning. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and thought of the thrilling mountain path. He couldn't help but feel a little regretful, but he soon dispelled all these regrets. The young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom, with his face full of pain and horror, fell to the side of the road, holding a small tree with both hands, like a drowning man holding the last piece of wood on the boat. No one knew what kind of mental shock he had experienced on the mountain path. Seeing Ning Ke walk by, the young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom showed a little bit of shame on his face. He subconsciously gritted his teeth, and gradually showed a resolute expression between his eyebrows, ready to climb up. Ning Ke didn't stop to talk to him, but just walked by in silence. However, he didn't know if it was because of the mental shock he had received today, those bad habits hidden in his bones since he came to Chang'an City began to break out uncontrollably. What if this guy stands up again after being inspired by me? What if this guy can bear the mental shock on the mountain path? What if this guy realizes something in the pain like me, or even directly breaks the realm? Although this kind of small probability event usually only happens to people like Prince Long Qing, what if the back of the mountain of the academy is a place to create miracles? Then I've inspired a potential competitor with my perseverance and determination. Ning Ke slowly stopped, feeling that he couldn't let this happen. He turned back to look at the young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom who was hugging the small tree and trying to stand up with difficulty. He said in the most sincere tone and expression, "If you can't bear it, don't continue. We've just climbed up the mountain, and no one knows what kind of test we'll face later." I saw many people being carried down the mountain on stretchers just now. I heard from the instructor of the academy that 2 of them have received a mental shock that may affect their future cultivation. He raised his hand and pointed to his forehead, saying sincerely, "If you want to continue, of course it's very admirable. But I advise you to seriously consider it." The so-called courage and determination were often things that happened in an instant. If one seriously considered it, then everything would become a bubble. If the thin small tree was the last piece of the ship that the young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom was hugging in the sea, then Ning Kei's words were the last wave that slapped the ship away. The young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom glanced at Ning Kei, and after a moment of hesitation, loosened his right hand that was tightly holding the small tree. He sighed and sat back down, lowering his head in pain and sadness. The second person Ning Kei met on the mountain path was the young monk. The young monk was not going up the mountain, but going down the mountain. He was not as embarrassed as the young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom. When he walked down the mountain path, he had a faint smile on his face, and his tattered monk robe fluttered in the wind, looking quite otherworldly. At the foot of the mountain, Ning Kei could tell that the young monk's state was quite high. Even if it was slightly lower than Prince Long Qing's, it was not by much. Looking at his current appearance, it was obvious that he still had some strength left. Ning Kei didn't understand why he would give up. "You're not going?" he asked. The young monk smiled and shook his head, saying, "The fog is not good, so I'm not going." After saying this, the young monk's gaze fell on the bloodstains on Ning Kei's body and face. His handsome brows slightly furrowed, and his smile gradually faded. He asked, "Why are you so embarrassed?" "I'd also like to ask why you're not embarrassed," Ning Kei replied. The young monk looked at him quietly, and suddenly said, "I suddenly feel that you might be a threat to me in the future. I want to kill you before you're strong enough." Ning Kei shook his head, pointed to the end of the mountain path, and said, "This is the academy, and this is the back of the mountain. You don't dare to kill me. Besides, thank you for telling me this. If we meet again next time, I'll try to kill you first. If you want to kill each other, shouldn't you tell each other your names?" The young monk smiled and said, "I'm Wu Dao from the wilderness." Ning Kei smiled and said, "I thought you were a monk from the Yueluan Kingdom, and I have a question that has been bothering me for a long time. It seems that I can't ask you now." The monk Wu Dao smiled and said, "Still want to ask?" Ning Kei tidied up his clothes, and sincerely said, "Zhong Dajuan from the academy." Not long after passing by the young monk, Ning Kei met the third person beside the mountain path. It was the academy teenager Wang Ying who had fallen into a coma. Ning Kei poured a handful of water on Wang Ying's face, and then turned back to look down the mountain path. He thought that the monk must have seen the unconscious teenager when he passed by, but he didn't stop to save him. Sure enough, he was not merciful, and the murder might be true. Among the 6 students of the course of magic skills, only Wang Ying from Linchuan was still persisting on the mountain path except for Xie Qingyun. But the teenager couldn't hold on for too long. Ning Kei glanced at Wang Ying's red face, and knew that he fainted because of the shock. Although he knew how to cure it, he really didn't have the energy and time to go to the valley to pick herbs. He stood up and shouted towards the bottom of the mountain path, "Where are you 4 porters?" Just as he finished speaking, there was a sound of clothes fluttering in the woods beside the road. The 4 deacons of the old library carried a simple stretcher and ran over breathlessly. They glanced at the unconscious Wang Ying and explained to Ning Kei, "We were resting just now, so we didn't find it. In addition, we are deacons of the old library, not porters." That person was seriously explaining, and suddenly saw Ning Kei's face clearly. He was shocked and shouted, "Why is it you again?" Ning Kei said angrily, "I have just said this at the foot of the mountain." They were all old acquaintances, so it was natural that they didn't need to explain. A deacon looked at Ning Kei and patted his chest, saying with fear, "Fortunately, climbing the mountain is a one-time business. If you climb the mountain like last year, you will run to death alone." Ning Kei laughed, which affected his injury, and blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth. "You are bleeding," a deacon kindly reminded. "It's nothing." Ning Kei carelessly wiped off the blood dripping from his lower jaw, and looked at them curiously and asked, "Why can you enter the mountain path?" "We are not cultivators," the deacon explained. Ning Kei called softly, and regretfully thought that if it was this day last year, when he couldn't cultivate, wouldn't it be easy to climb the long mountain path? Don't dream about it. There are many troubles ahead of us. The deacon reminded. Ning Ke laughed, and pointed to Wang Ying who was still in a coma, and said, "Then I will leave this child to you. I will go first." After saying this, he waved to the 4 acquaintances who had witnessed his climbing career, put his hands behind his back, and continued to climb the mountain while humming a tune. He talks like an old man, but in fact, he is also a child. A deacon looked at the back of the figure on the mountain path, shook his head, and said with emotion, "I don't know what kind of luck this guy has. He can actually cultivate." A deacon said with a smile, "Think about how miserable he was when he climbed the stairs every day last year. I think it is unfair for a child like him who can bear hardships not to be able to cultivate." At this moment, Wang Ying, who had undergone simple treatment, slowly woke up. He laid on the stretcher and looked at the blurry figure on the mountain path. He subconsciously rubbed his eyes, and when he saw clearly, he still could not believe what he was seeing. Wang Ying looked at the figure disappearing into the forest and murmured in shock, "Ning Ke. How could it be him? Why did he come up the mountain? Why is he still humming a song?" Ning Ke's self-composed children's song could be faintly heard from the front of the mountain path. His voice was very hoarse, but it was very powerful, and it was as stubborn as life. "I have a knife, I cut all the grass in the mountain. I have 2 knives, I cut all the heads of my enemies. I have 3 knives, I cut all the unhappy things. I cut you to death with 1 knife, I cut you to death with 2 knives, I cut you to death with every knife." 201112110047 edit. This chapter was written very well at that time, and it has been carefully revised. This time it can't be revised. I can only shamelessly ask for monthly votes and recommendation votes 1 month later. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 154. When the Tang Empire was founded 1,000 years ago, under the silent attention of Hautian Taoism, 17 countries attacked the Tang Empire and failed miserably. After this battle, the Tang Empire was established as the mighty ruler of the world. Even Hautian Taoism, who represented the divine light to illuminate the world, had to cover its eyes with a piece of dirty cloth and reluctantly admitted this fact. Today, Hautian Taoism was still widely spread in the Tang Empire, but it did not mean that the West Hill Divine Palace had the sacred and supreme status in other countries. Because in the knowledge of the Tang people, the religious institution qualified to convey the will of heaven was called the South School of Hautian Taoism, and it was the deformed product of the war many years ago. Nominally, the South School of Hautian Taoism of the Tang Empire was subordinate to Hautian Taoism, and it was directly managed by the West Hill Divine Palace. From the hierarch priest of the South School to the senior Taoists, they all cultivated Hautian Taoism, and their inheritance also continued from the Southwest. However, in fact, the South School of Hautian Taoism should be counted as a part of the Tang Empire. Countless years of practice proved that, whether it was emotional inclination or position choice, as long as there was a dispute between the Tang Empire and the Divine Hall, all the Taoists of the South School were very firm, they would always stand firmly on the side of the Tang Empire. Because of this reason, some conservative old Taoists in the West Hill Divine Palace always insisted that the South School was a traitor more abominable than the devil's doctrine. For the same reason, the Tang Empire always trusted the South School of Hautian Taoism. Today, the South School Divine Priest, Li Qingshan, was officially appointed as the nation master of the Tang Empire by His Majesty, and was also in charge of the Imperial Center Administration. The Imperial Center Administration was the institution that the Imperial Court governed all the cultivators in the Tang Empire, which showed the real relationship between the Tang Empire and the South School. The Taoist temple of the South School of Hautian Taoism was at the South School, not at the South School of Vermilion Bird in Chang'an City, but outside the south school of the imperial city. The black and white Taoist temple was set off by countless green trees, facing the imperial city from afar. It had a different kind of beauty. It looked calm and gentle, and relatively short, without too much sense of sacredness. In a side hall deep in the Taoist temple, there were two Taoists sitting at the end of the matte dark wooden floor. One of them wore a dark-colored Taoist robe, with a bright yellow belt bestowed by the emperor on his waist. He looked like an enlightened master. He was the imperial advisor of Tang, Li Qingshan. Sitting on the opposite side was a tall and thin old man. The old man was wearing a dirty Taoist robe that was stained with countless oil stains. His triangular eyes, which flickered with obscene light, were a stark contrast. In the face of the lofty Tang nation master, the old Taoist still stared at other places, his feet high, without any sense of respect or awe. Li Qingshan looked at the teacup on the table and said thoughtfully, "The academy is opening the second floor today." "Yes." The old Taoist priest responded. Sensing that something was amiss, Li Qingshan raised his head and happened to see the old Taoist priest staring lecherously at a beautiful, middle-aged female Taoist official who was passing by outside the corridor. The female Taoist official was smiling bashfully and timidly. Seeing this, Li Qingshan smiled bitterly. He looked at the old Taoist priest and said, "Senior brother, when you entered the talisman, you swore to enter Taoism with pure yang and never to be close to women. Since that's the case, why do you still linger in the brothel every night? Why do you always pretend to be a lecherous devil?" The wretched old Taoist was Yen Sei, the only remaining divine talisman master in the South School of Haotian Taoism. Hearing Li Qingshan's words, he shook his head disapprovingly. He stroked his beard and seriously retorted, "Junior brother, what you said is wrong. That year, I was anxious to enter the talisman and made that oath. I regretted it for half of my life. Now I don't dare to break the oath and really get close to women. Why don't I try to be as slutty as possible so that my Taoist heart can be free?" Li Qingshan smiled helplessly. He really had no way to deal with this senior brother who was good at Taoism but preferred to roll around in the mortal world. Then he solemnly said, "After Prince Long Qing enters the second floor, the back of the mountain of the academy will look after him. Our responsibility will be less." Hearing this, Master Yen Sei's expression also became rare to be serious. After thinking for a moment, he said, "That guy is already the number 2 figure in the judicial department at such a young age. He must have a big backer in the divine hall. It's best if we don't get involved." The position of the South School of Haotian Taoism had always been a bit awkward. They had to consider the interests of the Tang Empire first. However, the branch of the school was still in the West Hill. They were in the middle of such a gap. Besides, there were those historical love and hatred. Facing Prince Long Qing, the divine son who was specially cultivated by the West Hill Divine Palace, even Li Qingshan himself would feel very tricky if he didn't have the sacred code of the nation master of Tang. As the leader and minister of offerings of the South School of Haotian Taoism, they knew the unfathomable strength of the headquarter altar of the West Hill Divine Palace. So they never thought that Prince Long Qing couldn't enter the second floor. Compared with the West Hill Taoism, which has countless years of accumulation, our South School is still too weak. The strength of the Divine Hall is too unfathomable. Any one of the younger generation can make us feel troubled. Li Qingshan looked at Yen Sei with a solemn expression and said, "Junior brother Gongsun has been studying the method of combining talisman and tactical array. He has consumed too much of his blood and spirit. Now he has to stay in the mountain for self-cultivation. I don't know when he can recover his divine sense. Now, our South School only has you as a divine talisman master, and there is no successor. I really don't know how to deal with the situation in the future." The cultivators who could enter the knowing destiny state were often called grand cultivators. Once a talisman master could enter the knowing destiny state, he would be called divine talisman master, which was used to describe that this talisman master had some kind of power close to God. In ordinary battles, divine talisman masters did not necessarily have more powerful and magical means than other grand cultivators. However, talisman techniques could help cultivation, strengthen weapons and armors, set up tactical formations, benefit military affairs, and even make clouds and rain. However, talisman arts was the most difficult knowledge among all the cultivation methods. It was very particular about the cultivator's comprehension and aptitude. This kind of comprehension and aptitude was extremely difficult to explain in words. It could only be classified as a kind of natural sensitivity to talismans. It was purely an inborn ability, and could not be cultivated by perception. It was said that Liu Bai, the sage of Sword of South Jin Kingdom, had tried to understand talisman arts. However, even such a person who was recognized as a peerless talent could not make any progress in talisman arts. Therefore, for sects and countries, the existence of divine talisman masters was undoubtedly the most precious and the most scarce key figure. There was even a saying that a country without divine talisman masters was a small country, and a school without divine talisman masters was not qualified to enter the mainstream. The Tang Empire dominated the world, but there were no more than 10 divine talisman masters. Most of them were obsessed with the world of paper and ink talismans. They did not care about worldly affairs and lived in seclusion deep in the mountains. Only a few of them really walked in the world. The West Hill Divine Palace claimed to have the most powerful cultivators in the world, but the number of divine talisman masters was also very small. Yen Sei, the minister of offerings in the South School of Haotian Taoism, was such a divine talisman master. He could not help but feel sad when he thought that there would be no divine talisman masters in the South School after his death. He picked up the teacup on the table and drank the liquor. Putting down the cup, he looked at the sky to the south of the Taoist temple and said with emotion, "The Academy does not care about worldly affairs, but it secretly checks and balances everything in the world. I have to admit that it has its own strength. As an old Taoist, I know that there are 3 old fellows hiding in the Academy." The old fellows in this sentence naturally referred to the respected divine talisman masters. Li Qingshan frowned and said, "I heard that the one who presided over the opening of the 2nd floor of the Academy today, is a divine talisman master. But we have not found out who he is. It should be Huang He." Yen Sei said, "After hiding in the Academy for so many years, he is probably the only one who has not gotten rid of his mortal heart. I heard that Long Qing suffered some losses in Victory House a few days ago." Li Qingshan suddenly changed the topic and said indifferently, "Although we belong to the same sect and that young man is the focus of Haotian Taoism, as the great divine priest of the South School, I really should not take pleasure in his misfortune. But I don't know why I can't suppress my joy when I hear the news. Every time I talk about it, it is really hard for me to suppress my laughter. The Divine Hall wants Long Qing to take over the throne of the Yen Kingdom. That day when the princess sent the crown prince back, both Mo Li and Prince Long Qing would not miss such an opportunity and would definitely take advantage of it. What's more, Xingjing was with them that day. He said to Yen Sei, it is a pity that he did not expect that he would be tricked in his best verbal skills." Yen Sei paid more attention to the name of Xingjing. He sighed and said, "Her Majesty and Her Highness are now like fire and water. His Majesty is in the prime of his life. Isn't it too early to start fighting for the throne? Not to the extent of being like fire and water. Since the matter with the imperial astronomer, as far as I can see, Her Majesty has been silent and restrained, while Her Highness is young after all and can't control herself." Li Qingshan shook his head and said, "But this has nothing to do with our Haotian Taoism. They are all favored by the emperor, but Her Majesty has the Prince and Marquis Xiahou behind her. As you said, Li Yu is young after all. Even if she is good at dancing and has a lot of weight in the hearts of the younger generation, the people around her are inevitably young and lack some strength." Li Qingshan nodded slightly and said, "Exactly. I heard that the student of the academy who defeated Prince Long Qing in Victory House is also very close to the princess. But I heard that this little guy called Ning Ke can't cultivate. Hearing the name Ning Ke, Yen Sei slightly raised his eyebrows. He held the empty wine cup for a long time and then said softly, I have heard of this person. I even investigated him. He really has no potential for cultivation, otherwise I would choose him as my successor. Li Qingshan's expression suddenly became solemn. As the leader of the South School of Haotian Taoism, he knew how difficult it was for a divine talisman master to find a successor and how picky his senior brother was. Looking at his cautious eyes, Yen Sei knew what his junior brother was thinking. He sighed softly and took out a ball of rolled paper from his sleeve and spread it on the table. The thin paper from the House of Red Sleeves of the brothel was full of wrinkles, but it was still not damaged after several months. It could be seen how much Master Yen Sei valued it. This is a note he wrote after drinking. There are no strict rules of writing. The branches are messy, but the strokes are full of meaning. It seems to be messy, but the meaning can be condensed and even emitted. The words have the shape but not the meaning. I have never seen such a way of writing. After a moment of silence, Divine Talisman Master Yen Sei said, unfortunately, there is no fluctuation of primordial qi. Being stuck between the cracks requires even more power, and the only people from the southern gate who have a seat in the temple are me and you, senior brother. If what you said is true, if this academy student is really qualified to be your successor, you should know how important it is for our South School. Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at Yen Sei seriously and said in a low voice, we have to confirm whether he can cultivate or not. Yen Sei looked at the blue sky and drifting clouds outside the hall and shook his head slowly. He said, no need to check again. Although the little guy is born with talisman, he really can't cultivate. What a pity. Li Qingshan frowned and said, this is very important. Check again. The military ministry, Xiao Lu, the teachers from the academy, and your disciple have all confirmed that he can't do it. Yen Sei looked at him and said after a moment of silence, in fact, I was also not satisfied. I secretly went to check later, but the result was the same. It was a simple sentence, but it was unknown how much regret the old Taoist had for not having a successor. Li Qingshan was silent for a long time. He flicked his sleeve and said, check one last time. A young Taoist with a yellow paper umbrella under his armpit walked up to the two of them and knelt down respectfully. He placed the yellow paper umbrella beside him and took out a stack of files from the Imperial Center Administration. Then, he lowered his head and reported in a low voice, last summer, there was a report saying that a cultivator appeared in a casino in Southern City. After investigation, that person should be Ning Quebec. The room was in dead silence. Yen Sei's thin beard rose without a sound. He slammed the table heavily like an old and crazy tiger, and shouted angrily, that night, I asked you to investigate. What did you tell me? Uncle, the young Taoist answered inexplicably, the result was that Ning Ke's acupoints were blocked and he couldn't cultivate. Since your uncle asked you about this, why didn't you tell him about the report from the Imperial Center Administration? Li Qingshan looked at his disciple coldly. The young Taoist explained in a low voice, that young man has a special identity, so, what special? That Ning Ke seems to know Qi 4. Then? Qi 4 is Chao Xiaoshu's man. Then? Chao Xiaoshu is His Majesty's man. The young Taoist raised his head and looked at his master and uncle. He said in a low voice, if Ning Ke is His Majesty's man, the Imperial Center Administration must keep silent. Yen Sei didn't seem to hear him at all. He just stared at the files on the table. His old lips moved slightly and he murmured, that boy can really cultivate? How is it possible? His acupoints are obviously blocked. Li Qingshan noticed that the veins of his senior brother's right hand were bulging and slightly trembling. He knew that he must be emotional at this time and couldn't control himself. Senior brother. Yes. The two top bigwigs of the South School of Haotian Taoism looked at each other and saw the determination in each other's eyes. They nodded slightly. Li Qingshan said in a low voice, "As long as we can confirm that Ning Ke is really qualified to be your successor, we, the South School of Haotian Taoism, must snatch him to be your successor, no matter he is His Majesty's man or the Princess's man." The door of the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street was smashed open by someone. The neighbors who wanted to fight for justice subconsciously kept silent when they saw the yamen runners surrounding the door of the old brush pen shop, as well as the dangerous officials. Nation Master Li Qingshan broke into the old brush pen shop with Yen Sei. They didn't see Ning Ke, but they saw two pieces of calligraphy hanging on the wall. Good calligraphy. Yen Sei expressed his opinion in a concise and clear manner. Afterwards, he looked at Li Qingshan and said, "If I said I was 60% confident before, I'm 80% confident now. If I can see his greed and thirst for brush and ink, then I'm 10% confident." Li Qingshan frowned and asked, "How sure?" "If I can feel his hunger and thirst for writing." Yen Sei stared at his eyes and said solemnly, "You must give him to me. I am sure that there will be one more divine talisman master in the South School of Haotian Taoism after 10 years. Before going out, the respected divine talisman master looked around at the unsightly scented goods and said with emotion, "Who would have thought that in such a small bookstore in such a shabby street, there is a talented calligrapher of talisman Taoism?" Hearing this, Li Qingshan vaguely thought of one thing. He suddenly turned around and looked at the two authentic works of Ning Ke on the wall of the old brush pen shop. He suddenly raised his eyebrows. Outside the imperial study of the imperial palace, the little eunuch Lu Ji bowed respectfully and said, "Reporting to Nation Master, His Majesty is discussing the war of Yan Kingdom with the ministers in the court meeting. His Majesty said before the tea and porridge that since Nation Master rarely wants to appreciate calligraphy, please come in, but don't mess up the bookshelves." Hearing this, Li Qingshan opened the door of the imperial study without hesitation. Yen Sei stared at the paper scroll that was spread out, looking at the words, "Flowers bloom on the other shore," vividly written on it. His aged face gradually revealed an expression of endless joy and admiration. Li Qingshan looked at him seriously and asked, "Senior brother, do you see the hunger and thirst?" Although the style is completely different from that of the chicken soup calligraphy, I can confirm that it is written by the same person. Yen Sei said in a trembling voice, "As for the hunger and thirst, I can see that when he wrote this, he was as greedy as a fox that hadn't eaten chicken for 800 years. The young Taoist glanced aside and asked confusedly, "I have seen the double-hook copy of this calligraphy in the mansion of the old chancellor. The old chancellor said that these 5 words are full of vigor and spirit, without a trace of weakness and emptiness. It is hard to find in the world. In this case, why do you say it is hungry and thirst? You know nothing." Yen Sei scolded with his hair covering his face, "Only when you are unbearably hungry and thirsty can you hold the brush and write to your heart's content. How can you write so full of vigor and spirit?" The young Taoist hesitantly stepped back. Li Qingshan stared at Yen Sei's eyes and suddenly asked, 100%. Yen Sei looked back at his eyes and said forcefully, 100%. Li Qingshan waved his sleeve and laughed. The green leaves in the imperial garden were flying. Yen Sei gently stroked his thin beard and laughed enchantingly. The paper and brush in the imperial study shook slightly. "Find him. He is not at home. He is a student of the academy. Today the 2nd floor is opened. Of course he is in the academy. He can't cultivate. What does the opening of the 2nd floor have to do with him? The problem is that he can cultivate now. That is why we are in a hurry to find him. That makes sense. You go or I go. If I go, it will be too noisy. If the academy finds out his ability, it will not be good. Then I go. The nation master and the minister of offerings became happier as they talked. The young Taoist looked at the two elders who were excited and wanted to say something but stopped. Whether in the Southern Gate Temple or in the Imperial Center administration, his duty was to make up for the mistakes of his seniors. Therefore, although he was scolded repeatedly today and knew that his words would affect the mood of the two elders, he still had to say it. Master, uncle, since Ning Ke can cultivate, he will definitely try to enter the second floor. If he enters the second floor, what should we do? Li Qingshan and Yen Sei suddenly stiffened. After a while, they thought of something and breathed a sigh of relief at the same time with some lingering fear. Li Qingshan stared at the young Taoist and scolded, "What a fool! Even if he can cultivate, can he beat Prince Longqing? Of course he can't enter the second floor." Yen Sei shook his head and sighed, "I was worried about the divine son of West Hill. Now that I think about it, I have to thank him for directly cutting off Ning Ke's hope of entering the second floor." Li Qingshan took out a token from his yellow belt and handed it to Yen Sei. He said solemnly, "Don't let those old guys in the academy find out. If anyone dares to stop senior brother except the academy, you can punish them directly. You don't even have to use the name of the Southern Gate." Yen Sei took the token and looked at him with interest. He asked, "How?" "Whatever you want. Including Mo Li and Longqing." "Of course." The young Taoist interrupted again with a bitter smile. "Master, uncle, those two are sent to Chang'an by the West Hill Divine Palace. It's fine if we don't take the initiative to cooperate with them. But if we go against them, I'm afraid it will be unreasonable." "What's wrong with that?" Yen Sei glared at him and waved his old and smelly Taoist robe. He shouted, "I have lived for 80 years and finally found such a successor. Who dares to stop me?" Li Qingshan said in a cold voice, "Senior brother, you must bring him back. The future hope of the South School of Haotian Taoism lies in him. If anyone dares to stop you, kill them all." Outside the imperial study, the little eunuch Lu Ji had been eavesdropping on the impassioned conversation of the Taoist priests. It was not accurate to say eavesdropping. For those Taoist priests with wonderful skills, none of his actions could be hidden from them. But they did not care. Lu Ji glanced at the closed door of the imperial study and then at the direction of the Palace of Council. He thought to himself, that guy's identity is finally going to be exposed. This is the last chance for both Commander Su and myself. Having made up his mind, he didn't care much anymore. He quickly ran towards the direction of the conference hall with his slender legs, thinking that he had to tell His Majesty before the nation master did. However, he didn't know how to explain himself in front of His Majesty. "Great news, Your Majesty. The author of The Flower Blooms on the Shore has finally been found. His name is Ning Quebec." Ning Ke did not know that the Tang Nation Master and a Divine Talisman Master regarded him as the only hope to change the embarrassing and fatal situation of the South School of Haotian Taoism with no successor. They wanted to sweep away all the bad guys and snatch talents and wanted to take him as a disciple even if they cried. He also did not know that the calligraphy he wrote in the imperial study last year, which had been in various copies in the homes of the ministers for several months, was about to jump out of the sea. Later, the high and mighty Emperor of Tang might hold his hands with tears in his eyes, sobbing that he had been looking for him for a long time, and then reward him with thousands of acres of fertile land and numerous beautiful maids. He did not know these things. He was still struggling to walk on the mountain road in the back of the mountain of the academy. He only knew that the damn mountain road was getting harder and harder to walk. He only knew that there was a wooden bridge in front of the mountain road, and several mountaineers were standing on the bridge. Those mountaineers were either leaning against the tree or the bridge, looking tired and gloomy. One of them looked at the seemingly endless mountain road and sat down slowly on the ground, pale and desperate. It was Xie Qingyun. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 155. Along the way, the stone characters carved on the shore wall turned the surrounding environment into a waterfall with thousands of needles and leaves, which caused great harm to Ning Kei's body and spirit. In this kind of simulated natural confrontation, the tougher he was, the more terrifying the power of the stone characters would be. Although he had not fallen down at this point, his body was already extremely weak. He raised his arm, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and walked towards the bridge. After crossing the small bridge, the invisible but omnipresent pressure suddenly disappeared. Knowing that he had finally passed the first test, he subconsciously looked back at the long mountain road and sighed with lingering fear. Two young cultivators sat on the mountain path at the end of the bridge. Their expressions were dim, even in despair. Even when they heard Ning Kei's footsteps, they did not look up at him. It was as though this world had no meaning to them. Ning Kei walked up to them and looked at their expressions. He suddenly said seriously, "It's not shameful to give up when you should." When passing by Xie Qingyun, he didn't stop and didn't talk to the academy's favorite scholar. Xie Qingyun's eyes moved from the pair of feet on the mountain road to the back of the figure that continued to move forward. A faint perplexed color appeared in his eyes. He felt that the figure was somewhat familiar, but there were some things that he could not understand. Ning Kei knew that the mountain road behind the bridge was still weird. Otherwise, the three climbers, including Xie Qingyun, would not sit on the bridgehead and lean against the tree in despair. But he did not stop to observe or do anything else, but went straight up. The winding mountain path was difficult to see the end. He lowered his head and walked in silence, following the green stone path that divided the spring flower forest into two halves. He made several turns, passed several lakes, crossed several flower fields, and climbed over a precipitous stone cliff. The mountain path that slanted upwards suddenly slanted downwards. He passed several flower fields, passed several lakes, and made several turns. Then he looked up and saw the wooden bridge, the tree at its end, and the three gloomy climbers. The winding mountain path was clearly heading up the mountain, but in the end, it turned back to the original point. It was somewhat like the legendary ghost wall in the forest. A cool breeze gradually rose in the forest at the end of the bridge. The twilight was getting colder, and there was an inexplicable sense of eeriness. There was neither shock nor fear on Ning Kei's face. He just stared blankly at the tree at the end of the bridge and the person under the tree for a while. Then he turned around and looked at the mountain path that he had already walked through and closed his eyes silently. After seeing the scene at the bridgehead, he thought of a certain possibility: this mountain path would bring people back. The reason was very simple. Even if there was a bottomless abyss or a soul-devouring evil beast in front of the mountain road, the three climbers, including Xie Qingyun, might not be able to climb up, but there was no reason for the three of them to give up climbing at the bridgehead. Moreover, the expressions on their faces did not seem to be tragic after some kind of torment, but more like a kind of futility of being lost. The question was, why would the mountain path behind the bridge bring people back to the original spot? This was the problem that Ning Kei needed to solve now. He closed his eyes and stood silently under the mountain path behind the bridge. His hand stretched out of his sleeves and gently felt the aura in the wind. The seemingly forward mountain path could only bring people back to the original spot. If the secret could not be solved, then the climbers could only walk up the mountain path again and again in vain, and then walk back to the original spot again and again in despair. The three low-spirited climbers at the bridgehead finally gave up in such a boring and desperate cycle. At this time, they saw Ning Kei, their companion, standing in front of the mountain path and thinking that he would try to walk up the mountain path again like they did before, and then walk back a moment later with a perplexed look. They could not help showing sympathy and some sarcasm on their faces. There was no sympathy, pity, or sarcasm on Xie Qingyun's face. Ning Ke was not shocked by this magical mountain path, but when he saw clearly the appearance of Ning Ke walking back from the mountain path, he was suddenly shocked speechless. After the entrance exam of the academy, Xie Qingyun had always regarded Ning Ke as his strongest opponent in the days of continuous climbing. However, after the semester exam, he confirmed that he had overestimated this young soldier from the border town. In the following time, Ning Ke was excluded and neglected by the academy students. Although he did not add insult to injury, he had indeed forgotten this former opponent. When the second floor of the academy opened, his goal was Prince Long Qing. He even thought that there would be many other strong opponents in the course of the exam, but he just did not think of Ning Quebec. Because he thought that he had defeated Ning Ke, then why should he pay more attention to him? What qualifications did a defeated opponent who had fallen in front of him have to distract him? Until today at the bridgehead, when he saw the figure on the mountain path and Ning Ke walking down the mountain path, his heart suddenly tightened. Only then did he realize that he had not defeated Ning Ke at all, and even maybe he had never seen this classmate clearly. What was more magical was that the more powerful the climber's psyche power was, the more abundant the chi of heaven and earth they could control. Once they touched the tactical array, the fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth covering the real mountain path would be more violent and directly destroy the passages the climbers had just touched. That was to say, the more powerful the person's psyche power was, the more abundant the chi of heaven and earth they could control, and the easier it was for them to find the real mountain path hidden in the tactical array. At the same time, they would quickly change the tactical array and cover the real mountain path again. If a climber wanted to pass through the mountain path covered by the formation, there were only 3 ways. First, you had to be fast enough. When you found the real mountain path, you had to turn into a flash of lightning and fly over before the formation was triggered. Second, your state was high enough. You didn't need to use the chi of heaven and earth to touch and feel. You only needed to use your psyche power to see through the tactical array and see the flow of the primordial chi in the mountain path, and then find the road. Third, your psyche power was strong enough to control the chi of heaven and earth to accurately feel the passages in the tactical array. But at the same time, you had to ensure that the chi of heaven and earth could not be sensed by the tactical array and change it. There must be cultivators who could trigger faster than the tactical array, such as those legendary sages who entered the limitless state. But that person was definitely not Ning Quebec. There must be cultivators who had a high enough state to see through the tactical array, such as Prince Long Qing who had entered the fog on the mountainside. But that person was definitely not Ning Quebec. For Ning Ke and the cultivators at the bridgehead who were lost and desperate, they could only choose the third way. But if they analyzed it carefully, they would know that the third way was basically impossible. They were like blind people who could not see. The primordial chi that formed the tactical array on the mountain path was like a maze made of something softer than cream. A blind person could only use his hands to touch the cream walls. He had to touch them carefully and attentively to find the passage of the cream maze. At the same time, he could not let the cream walls change shape. Because once they changed shape, the maze would change again. To do all this, the blind person had to have the most gentle hands in the world. This pair of gentle hands could catch the wind in the forest without the wind knowing, take off the clothes of a woman on the bed without the woman waking up, and brush the ink and sweat in the inkstone without a speck of black. For cultivators, this pair of gentle hands was the chi of heaven and earth that their psyche power could mobilize. They had to ensure that the chi of heaven and earth they mobilized was accurate and gentle enough to control the fine needles to embroider, to make the flowers stick to the bees, and to make the bees dance on the tips of the needles. Only in this way could they try to do what they wanted. However, Which cultivator in the world would be so bored to the point that he had to forcefully mobilize the chi of heaven and earth to make the chi of heaven and earth weak and gentle, and then spend so much effort to practice embroidery that was not beneficial to cultivation? The person who set up the tactical array on the mountain path must be an old pervert. Ning Ke looked at the winding mountain path in front of him and made a judgment of the tactical array master of the academy in his heart. Then he put his hand into his bosom and touched the extremely thin and cool pile of things. He thought silently, but I seem to be a pervert too. Just like when he was on the mountain path on the other side of the bridge, he sighed when he looked at the sky with slightly wet eyes. These years of hardship seem to have become a gift from Lord Haotian today. Normal cultivators absolutely could not use the third method to pass the mountain path, but Ning Ke seemed to be able to use it. Although he might not be able to pass, at least he maintained that wonderful possibility. Since he was very young, Ning Ke would constantly meditate whether he was eating, sleeping, in a daze, or writing, as long as he had time. However, he did not open the acupoints of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi, and the psyche power obtained from meditation had been accumulated in his sense of perception. As time went by, it accumulated into a vast lake. Until last year, he finally opened the acupoints, and it became his biggest support. With such a strong psyche power, only an idiot would deliberately make the chi of heaven and earth that he could mobilize weak and gentle. Ning Ke did not want to, but he was different from other ordinary cultivators. He could not cultivate, but his fate was changed by several adventures. In the end, the ocean of chi and mountain of snow in his body only barely opened 10 acupoints, and the chi of heaven and earth that he could perceive was pitifully little. Because it was little, it was gentle. As for manipulating the chi of heaven and earth to do embroidery, this seemingly perverted and boring action was in fact what Ning Ke had been doing every night in Lin 47th Street for the past 6 months. The chi of heaven and earth that he could manipulate was too little. He knew that it was extremely difficult to win in a battle with this, so he increasingly wanted to control it more meticulously. Under the candlelight every night, under the curious gaze of Sang Sang, the lad who had finally stepped into the cultivation world kept meditating and sensing the chi of heaven and earth in the room. He controlled the leaves, the wooden basin, the candlestick, the brush, the black, the paper, the inkstone, the toilet, and everything else. Until today, he had always been stuck in the no-doubt state and had not yet found his natal item. He still could not control the flying sword to fly randomly like those sword masters and kill people invisibly in the air. But he could control the hundreds of fallen leaves under the tree in the courtyard to fly to the stove and pile up into a hill. He could control the wooden basin to move from one end of the bed to the other end of the bed like a fat doll, which made Sang Sang applaud excitedly. He could control the brush to fall slowly into the inkstone and then lift it up to write clumsily on the paper like a beginner. Ning Ke practiced silently and painstakingly just like when he learned to kill beasts and people in Min Mountain. He practiced controlling the chi of heaven and earth as if he had waved the knife tens of thousands of times. The fallen leaves flying in the courtyard, the water flowing in the room, the ink spilling on the desk and the white wall, the stench of the overturned toilet, and the sweat of Sang Sang when she cleaned up the mess were all his proofs. This method was very bitter, which was the meaning of painstaking practice. This method was very clumsy, which was the meaning of hard work to make up for. This method was very perverted, which ordinary people could not think of, let alone do. That was why even God was moved by it. Xie Qingyun leaned against the tree and looked at Ning Ke under the mountain road. He said bitterly, "Ning Ke, I don't know why you have been hiding your strength. Maybe you look down on me, but I can see that you are the same as me, in the no-doubt state. Only those in the see-through state can master the law of the fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth. You want to walk through this mountain road, unless there is a miracle. Before entering the academy, Mistress Jian once told me that the academy is a place to create miracles." Ning Ke took out a thin layer of silver foil from his arms, tore it into countless pieces with his palms, and then sprinkled them in front of him. The mountain wind blew from the valley under the bridge and whistled through the mountain path, blowing those thin and seemingly weightless pieces of silver foil in all directions. They fluttered like countless silver leaves and then fell silently on the mountain path. It is a miracle that I am alive, so I will make it a miracle every day I am alive. After saying this, Ning Ke looked at the clear silver road in his sense of perception and stepped up. When he walked up the mountain road, he seemed to be in high spirits, but then his movements became strange and clumsy. He lowered his body, squatted down very slowly against the tree, and then carefully moved 2 steps forward. Then he put his right hand into the cliff, turned back with difficulty, and took another step forward. People in the academy looked at the sloping mountain road in the twilight, and suddenly someone exclaimed, "I see it, it is Ning Ke." Someone sneered and said, "What is he doing? He lifts his leg. Is he going to lie on the ground and crawl through a dog hole?" Zhong Dajuan gently waved his folding fan and sneered, "He is really good at crawling through a dog hole to escape." Ning Ke was the last to climb the mountain, but he actually held on for such a long time, which had already exceeded most people's expectations, especially those academy classmates who thought they knew him well. They were even more shocked, and inevitably envied and hated him. Chang Jingming frowned slightly, looking at Ning Ke who was struggling to move forward on the mountain road. His movements seemed extremely ridiculous, and suddenly remembered his conversation with Ning Ke in the academy last year. He muttered to himself, "I don't know how long he can hold on. He is just a brute." Zhong Dajuan snapped his folding fan and said bitterly. Situilan turned her head to look at him, and then coldly looked around at the classmates with complicated expressions. She sneered and said, "He has surpassed the 6 students in the course of magic skills, and is the rightful number 1 in the academy. Are you still not convinced?" The academy students were silent. On the sloping mountain road, Ning Ke's psyche power spread out of his body, mobilizing the thin chi of heaven and earth to sense the silver foil fragments scattered on the mountain road, and then used the silver foil to find the channel of the tactical array in the most gentle way. Ning Ke had not been able to determine his natal item, but there was no doubt that in this world, besides Sang Sang, the thing that could resonate with his psyche power the most was still silver. Because exchanging gold required the official notarization, he had not tried gold yet. With the help of the silver foil, he squatted down, got up, and climbed obliquely on the quiet mountain road clumsily. However, at least he was not taken back to the bridgehead by the mountain road again. Xie Qingyun stood at the bridgehead and looked at the mountain road with a perplexed expression. He could not figure out what method Ning Ke had used to surpass him and walk on the mountain road that he could not pass no matter how hard he tried. Looking at the comical figure that was getting farther and farther on the mountain road, he could not help but think of the lonely figure that he could occasionally see on the meadow in the past 6 months when he and Wuxia walked by the lake, the figure that was forgotten by the academy for half a year. He thought of his pride after the semester exam, and the figure that disappeared in the rain-shielding corridor. He clutched his right chest tightly and looked at Ning Ke at the end of the mountain road, shouting painfully and unwillingly, "Ning Ke, you can't surpass Prince Long Qing." He has been in the fog for a long time. Ning Ke's figure disappeared at the turn of the mountain road. Xie Qingyun stared at that place blankly. A voice sounded at the turn. "At least I have surpassed you." Xie Qingyun clutched his chest and fell under the tree, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Among the clouds on the top of the mountain. Second brother, Ning Ke is about to enter the fog. Has he passed the wooden door? No. He has a hard time in the wooden door. He can't remember it unless he is in the upper state of see-through. This thing can't be done by luck. Ning Ke has been reading books in the old library for a year, but he still can't remember it. The words on the stone are deeper than the ink on the paper. 1 degree deeper means 1 more world. He can remember books in the old library, but he can't remember the stone. Ah. Second brother, is there a back door in the wooden door? Pippi. Yes, second brother, I know I was wrong. How many steps has Prince Long Qing walked in the fog? He has walked through 4,102 stone steps. Didn't he rest? No. He has walked to the age of 12 so quickly. It seems that those old Taoists in West Hill really have some skills. Ning Ke walked through the winding mountain path and picked up a thin piece of silver foil that had flown the furthest. Then he looked up and saw that the mountain path in front of him was faintly hidden in the thick fog on the mountainside, with no end in sight. And in front of the fog, there was a wooden door. He walked in front of the wooden door and saw a wooden sign with 3 words written on it. A gentleman doesn't. Ning Ke frowned slightly and looked at the blank space on the wooden plate. Then he looked at the powder stone under the wooden plate and guessed that it was for him to fill in the blank. What was the 4th word? Not far from the wooden door, he saw a stone. There were 4 deep words carved on it. A gentleman doesn't use tools. So simple. He shook his head in surprise and then turned back to the wooden door. However, when he picked up the powder stone and wanted to write the 4th word, he was shocked to find that he had forgotten what the word was. Picking up the pen, he forgot the words. His fingers holding the powder stone stiffened. He walked back to the stone with the words carved on it and looked at them quietly. He immediately guessed what the test of the wooden door was. In this world, it would be difficult to find someone who was more familiar with this kind of situation than him. He had been fighting with the books on the 2nd floor of the old library for a whole year since he entered the academy. Look at my great 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. Ning Ke picked some withered branches from the roadside and placed them according to the word on the stone. Then he slowly closed his eyes and began to decompose the memory in his sense of perception. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and smiled like an idiot. You are really an idiot. After saying this sentence full of self-blame, his right hand reached for the stone. In the fog on the top of the mountain. Second brother, Ning Ke passed the wooden door. How could it be? That idiot's 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong could solve the wooden door raining stone. He didn't use that method. Then how did he remember that word? First, he tried to dig out the stone directly. Idiot, the stone is connected with the mountain. How could he dig it out? Ning Ke found that he couldn't dig it out, so he directly pressed his palm on the stone and printed the word on his palm. What? Then, he walked to the wooden door and copied the handprint on his palm. There was silence in the mountain fog. Then someone sighed and said, "This method is really ingenious." Second brother, did you also do this when you walked on the mountain road? What do you mean by originality? This is opportunistic. Do I look so shameless? Is Ning Ke the first person in the history of the academy to open the wooden door in this way? Second brother's voice sounded again after a long silence. No. Then who is it? Eldest brother. Eldest brother was enlightened at the age of 13, and then entered the no-doubt state at the age of 30. Then he went straight to the see-through and knowing destiny state. 17 years were not enough for him to open the wooden door. During those 17 years, eldest brother used this method every time he went up and down the mountain and passed by the wooden door. Ning Ke picked up the powder stone and opened his left hand. Looking at the red lines on his palm, he began to meticulously write on the wooden plate of the wooden door. Although the words on the stone became reversed on his palm, it was not a problem for him who was proficient in calligraphy. The word tool was neatly written on the wooden sign. Just as the small opening on the bottom right of the word was sealed by the powder, a wisp of green smoke instantly rose from the wooden sign that had the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," written on it. Ning Ke took a step back and saw that the 4 words on the wooden plate became 3 again, and the last word, tool, disappeared. With a squeak, the wooden door slowly opened in front of him. The mountain road behind the wooden door rose straight into the thick fog on the mountainside. It was much steeper than the mountain road in front of it, and it was all composed of stone steps. It was unknown how many steps it would take to climb to the top of the mountain. Ning Ke should have walked directly to the back of the wooden door, but he could not suppress his curiosity. He looked back at the stone beside the road and saw that the words on the stone had changed. It was no longer, "A gentleman is not a tool," but "A gentleman is not confused." I don't know what Prince Long Qing saw. He curiously thought, walked through the wooden door, walked up the steps, and disappeared in the thick fog on the mountainside. It was quiet in the academy, not even a bird or a person. An academy student was slightly pale. He looked at the mountain and murmured, "Luck, it must be luck." Zhong Dajuan tightly held the handle of the folding fan and said in a hoarse voice, "This guy, how many things has he hidden? He is too insidious." No one paid attention to them, including Situilan. Everyone in the academy looked at the mountain and the mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. Although they could not see the figure of the academy student, they still looked over there. The academy student was the second one to walk into the mountain fog. Some people even began to guess that maybe the guy could reach the top of the mountain before Prince Long Qing. 7,000 words. Writing and reading should be relaxing and happy things. I'm having fun writing now. For example, the last 3 chapters, especially the part about opening the wooden door today, I'm having fun while writing. I hope everyone can have fun reading it. I'll work hard. Please give me your recommendation votes and monthly votes to encourage me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.